Lightsabers, the cornerstone of Jedi and Sith combat. There are tales of Force wielders being so powerful that they can dispatch opponents with simply a flex of raw ability. But by and large, when two members of the most prominent Force religions decide to butt heads, the saber is the weapon of choice. Having been beings who have spent their entire lifetimes mastering this sacred blade, an endless analysis have been done on the unique styles of combat and the constructions of these elegant weapons. But sometimes, Force users will take their combat to the unorthodox, the unknown. When raw power in the Force, nor a single blade suits them, they choose a weapon of unpredictability. Some weapons they even made as unpredictable as the living Force itself. These rarities always make for some of the most interesting battles, and in today's holocron, we are going to be talking about a handful of the strangest and most exotic lightsaber variants in the entire Star Wars galaxy. Of course, at the end, we want to invite you all to comment what you think is easily the weirdest lightsaber variant that you've come across in the lore, and if we happen to miss it in this video, be sure to load up the comments with your suggestions for a potential part 2. But before we enter the Saber Forge, our master craftsmen have informed us that there are those present who have not fully given themselves over to the way of the blade. We are always exploring the strange and unusual that the Force has to offer, so if that ignites your interest, then choose your lightsaber variant and slash that subscribe button. Now acolytes, let us begin. Let's start with the ground rules. Firstly, we don't want this to be a simple checklist of every kind of lightsaber that doesn't follow the traditional mentality. There are a ton of unique lightsaber hilts around the galaxy, from curved hilts to tonfa lightsabers, and even some hilts made from wood and rancor teeth. The main criteria we had for this list, though, was that the variant had to be fundamentally different and alter the way the lightsaber functions and is wielded. Also, it has to rely on Kyber technology and be wielded by either a Jedi or a Sith. In the future, we may do a list where we loosen up the rules just a bit to cover a wider breadth of items and lightsabers. But for today, we really wanted to hone in on the true lightsabers that just happen to be very strange in their creation. So with that in mind, we have selected 7 lightsabers from across all of the lore. We chose not to limit ourselves to Legends, Canon, or even non-canon and Infinity stories. That way, we could dive into the really weird and obscure without feeling constricted by any continuity. Also, this list is in no particular order, though we have tried to save some of our strangest sabers for last. But to start off, one of the many that we're familiar with is the darksaber, and we believe that this lightsaber sets the tone nicely. This is a famous lightsaber in the lore, especially in recent years in the debut in live action. But who doesn't love the darksaber? It was made by one of the only Mandalorian Jedi in history, Tar Vizsla. Tar Vizsla brought a piece of his own culture over into his Jedi lifestyle, crafting a lightsaber with a shape unlike any other, in a flat wedge-shaped hilt made of pure Beskar, and produced a flat angular blade, one shaped more like a conventional sword. This echoed his Mandalorian heritage, a pride that he kept with him through his entire life as a Jedi. But what truly made the saber unique was its namesake. The darksaber was completely black and seemed to draw all light into it when it was activated, giving it a white outer glow. In almost every single way, it is the opposite to a lightsaber, not just in its design, but in its very sound. When ignited and swung, the darksaber released a high-pitched whistling rather than the low humming of a conventional lightsaber. The darksaber was kept in the Jedi archives and was studied for decades after Tar Vizsla's death. And yet, no Jedi fully learned how it functioned or how it was constructed. To this day, we still haven't been told whether or not the darksaber was an onyx crystal or something else. But if we had to guess, it is likely something from the mines of Mandalore itself. But what truly places the darksaber on our list today is because of its innate property to choose its owner. As we said earlier, a main criteria is that the variant of a lightsaber must possess an aspect which fundamentally alters the weapon's function. And for the darksaber, this aspect is that it is implied to be sentient, or at the very least, has some kind of will of its own. This weapon cannot pass from one owner to the next unless it is won in battle, or in the case of Maul, the user either surrenders it or ceases to become worthy of it. Its rules are sometimes a little ill-defined, but of greatest importance is doing something to prove oneself worthy of wielding it. And even if you do prove yourself worthy, there is a period of learning to attune to the weapon. As we saw in The Mandalorian, the darksaber will resist its wielder and become heavy and ungainly if the wielder does not surrender themselves and become partners with it. But once the wielder fully attunes to the darksaber, the lightsaber will begin to flow freely whether the wielder is force sensitive or not. And what's more, is that it will respond to the user's emotional state by crackling with energy whenever they become angered or distressed. With the darksaber, there is always more to talk about, but we have other variants today that we want to discuss, so let's move on. Let's pivot from a blade that values honor to a blade that discourages honor. Many here are familiar with the forbidden lightsaber form known as Trakata. Trakata was a style which heavily utilized a saber's ability to switch its blade on and off in combat. Users of Trakata will turn off their lightsaber mid-combat in order to bypass an opponent's guard, then switching the weapon back on for a killing strike. This is done to catch an opponent by surprise, to end a conflict quickly. But with that said, its use is contentious in and outside of the lore. Many believe it is a dishonorable move. The Jedi believe it to be unsportsmanlike, and the Sith actually find it to be a weakness, calling it a trick and not a sign of pure victory and power. However, an equally popular school of thought is that one should do whatever it takes to win a fight, and there should be no reason not to utilize a saber to its full function. For the latter group of individuals, we believe that they will greatly enjoy this lightsaber, the Flicker Phase Blade. Coming to us from the Canon Force and Destiny tabletop RPG is this cunning lightsaber variant, a lightsaber that has been modified to allow its blade to ignite and extinguish at completely random intervals. Obviously, a weapon of this kind is incredibly difficult to use, as it may pose to be of much a danger as the wielder as it is to any opponent. But generally speaking, when using the flicker phase, one avoids blocking directly and goes for parries or dodges while attacking ruthlessly. The erratic nature of the blade switching on and off without the user's control completely mitigates an opponent's ability to sense what the user might do, therefore totally erasing one of Trakata's key weaknesses. If even the user doesn't know when it will occur, how can the opponent sense it? There's obviously an argument to be made that a flicker phase blade user would learn how to sense or predict when the blade will switch on and off and can adjust in battle accordingly. However, the unreliability of this weapon could do far more damage than good. Nonetheless though, we found this to be a fascinating blade, and we wanted to bring it to you guys. But let's go ahead and move on. Our next for the strangest variants definitely has to go to the lightsaber parasol from Star Wars Visions. This was an exotic Sith weapon created by Koru, which in actuality was an attachment to her main single-bladed lightsaber. Once the parasol auxiliary was attached to her hilt though, it would produce 8 separate blades and reassemble an umbrella. The weapon also had a spinning function on it much like the Inquisitors, creating a shield of defense or a devastating buzzsaw for attack. I don't consider this to be an elegant weapon by any stretch of the definition though, but it's definitely an intimidating one that can oppress lesser experienced enemies. Since Koru was the leader of a bandit gang which oppressed impoverished worlds, it's likely that she saw a lot of success when brandishing this weapon against local security and bounty hunters. But when meeting an experienced saber wielder, they put this away in favor of the standard lightsaber with a single blade. This indicates that she's aware that the attachment could be a hindrance in an equal fight, and is purely used for intimidation. We also wanted to bring up the blaster saber of Ezra Bridger. Despite it being the first lightsaber he ever constructed, Ezra used great ingenuity in designing a weapon that perfectly suited the era that it was created in. Kanan Jarrus had demonstrated the value of having a lightsaber that blended in with regular tools, as Kanan always kept his lightsaber in 2 pieces. Ezra would then take inspiration from this, along with his wrist-mounted electro slingshot to create a perfect undercover Jedi weapon. I think it's understated just how much skill Ezra actually needed to pull this off. Crafting a lightsaber is already an extremely intensive process, even for any basic kind. But Ezra didn't grow up in the temple, but took a crash course in the Jedi way from a Padawan who never finished his own apprenticeship. Using only the schematics from Kanan and the scrap found on the Ghost, Ezra managed to create a hybridized lightsaber which served 2 functions simultaneously. Later, Kanan would display the potential lethality of the weapon when he expertly employed it against the Grand Inquisitor. He used the blaster function to close the gap between himself and his enemy, before using the lightsaber in conjunction with his own. He would even proceed to rapidly swap between the saber function and the blaster function to catch the Inquisitor off guard. It's quite a bit of a shame that Ezra abandoned this unique design when constructing his second weapon, as his first really showed off his ingenuity, but clearly was not very Jedi-like. But speaking of potential explored, we have a weapon that has made quite a few appearances in both Legends and Canon, and one of my favorite personal variants of the lightsaber, the Light Whip. This is one of the more exotic breeds of lightsabers, and one that has made its round in both continuities. Their internal workings permitted the containment field of the lightsaber plasma blades to be flexible, and instead of pulling from energy from one large crystal, they contained multiple small crystals, and the plasma in the blade had no cell barriers to keep it straight. They were often several meters in length and extremely complicated to wield effectively. Not only does one have to know how to use a regular whip first, but you have to be able to use it without the flexible blade ever touching you. The light whip was a rare and an exotic weapon, an unfamiliar occurrence among traditional duelists. Due to this though, light whip practitioners enjoyed considerable leverage over enemies. Along with its rarity, light whips also featured copious range, and the weapon was difficult to defend against, as it could simply flex around an enemy's blade when they attempted to parry. Light whips also come in a variety of different colors and forms, such as is the case with Vernestra from Canon. She could switch her lightsaber form to a regular blade from a whip mode at will, although she kept this function a secret. And then you have the far superior light whip, Lady Lumaya, who fashioned her light whip to have multiple tassels, some energy and some physical. Lumaya's weapon was made out of Mandalorian iron, which is Legends for Beskar. This allowed her to use energy tassels to be used with the physical in conjunction. This reinforced its strength and made it even deadlier. But as strong as light whips can be, they had a vast amount of drawbacks, many weaknesses. There's a larger chance of one maiming themselves with a light whip if they're not sufficiently trained or if a battle goes wrong. But also, the whip blades were far weaker than regular lightsaber blades. They could not always successfully penetrate durasteel, and there were many substances that could survive a direct hit, usually only scoring hits on armored enemies rather than cutting straight through them. Not to mention, it needed to be swung out widely to gain momentum for an attack, leaving the user open. It also had pathetically little defense, as there were very few techniques in the way of parrying with a light whip. Not to mention with the multiple small crystals in place of one larger one, the tassels were known to essentially short out, and could break when hit with enough force. There has been a reason that Lumaya included the metal tassels on hers. The primary advantage of the light whip though, is that most people are completely unprepared to face it, and cannot predict its erratic blade properly. This is its main reason, its main trick. But it has been proven that when one uses enough speed, or brute strength, they can bulldoze a light whip wielder, such as Luke Skywalker and Lumaya. And of all of the exotic lightsaber variants, this one is one of the worst options, at least in our opinion, while at the same time also being one of the cooler variants. But now we're getting into the real weird weapons and strange lightsabers. And honestly, lightsabers that don't get a lot of love from the fan base, and some of them outright get hated on. The first of which is the Soul Saber. The Soul Saber comes from the Star Wars tabletop RPG and is the centerpiece of the Child of Light campaign saga. These campaigns currently fall under the unlicensed category, but since the campaigns are recognized as legends, we thought we would go out on a limb and include the Soul Saber on our list. The Soul Saber is called the ultimate dark side weapon and was created at some point before 20,000 BBY by a dark Jedi whose name has unfortunately been lost to the annals of history. The saber had a black hilt with a brosnium wrapping and a metal emitter shaped like the mouth of a dragon. The blade produced from its mouth is a deep amethyst color with a black core. It was said that flecks of red also flashed up and down the length of the blade. Some believe that the lightsaber was more of a manifestation of the dark side and its energy than a simple energy blade. And because of its rare, terrible properties, it has been labeled as an abomination to both the light and the living force. So what even is the Soul Saber? Well, it's broken down like this. It's essentially its own dark side nexus, and its presence could be felt by anyone standing within 10 meters of it. Even non-force sensitives would begin to feel sick and uneasy, while force sensitive not aligned with the dark side would begin to get terrible headaches, nausea, and find it difficult to concentrate. The purpose of the Soul Saber was to destroy life and to corrupt. Simply igniting the blade, the wielder would be hit with negative emotions like anger and fear. They can feel nothing but aggression, and the weapon whispers promises of glory and great power. This saber truly hates the light side also. If a being attuned to the light side attempts to touch the lightsaber, they are immediately hit with a backlash of dark side energy. Any being that is unfortunately tagged or struck by the blade would feel as though they were being stabbed by an agonizing cold and were flooded with emotions of despair. It even acted like a virus of the dark side. But while this was occurring, their very life force was being siphoned away from them. This despicable lightsaber actually fed on those that it injured and killed, all the while empowering the one wielding it. The life energy it drained, it fed into its wielder, allowing them to fight with relentless stamina, even when at death's door. It was said that those who used the Soul Saber were unaware that they were so close to death, even if they had been mortally wounded. It was simply too intoxicating. But one of the other major drawbacks of the lightsaber was that it tempted all dark side wielders near it. which meant that the wielder's allies would turn on them and attack them to get the blade. Still, themselves hearing the whispers and promises of power emanating from the lightsaber, no matter who possessed it. This sinister tool was used by a singular Dark Jedi against a group of Jedi Masters on the planet of Bamor Jal. Once he was finally defeated, the Jedi placed the Soul Saber in the Cavern of Light, hiding it away on a distant world, using a light side nexus to mask the saber's potent dark side energy. And with that, guys, comes our last pick. It is sort of cheating in our own rules though, but we think that there are a few weapons that fundamentally alter the entire function of a lightsaber, and one of the best examples of that is the lightsaber rifle. The lightsaber rifle is exactly what it sounds like. It's a rifle that shot lightsabers. A Jedi need only to load their lightsaber into the top slot of the rifle. Then, it would use all of that saber's Kyber crystal and the power cell to fire highly destructive beams of Kyber energy. One could fire the weapon at least 5 times before the lightsaber hilt inside is completely melted and destroyed. This weapon made an appearance in canon following Order 66, in the storyline when Jocasta Nu returned to the Jedi Temple to gather important information. Jocasta ended up using her own lightsaber with this weapon against Lord Vader, but as powerful and destructive as it was, Vader still managed to deflect all of the blaster bolts, as Jedi are trained to do. Jocasta would then almost successfully escape, setting the rifle to self-destruct, blowing out a sizable hole in the temple's wall. The origin of the rifle is a complete mystery, and we find it to be an incredibly confusing weapon, frankly. We mentioned this before, but a lightsaber rifle fundamentally goes against all philosophies of the Jedi in relation to their lightsabers. Lightsabers are swords meant to be used as shields, an elegant tool which displays a Jedi's restraint. It shows that while they could do more to their enemy, they very purposefully do not. It's a symbol of their authority, their peace-loving nature. To load that symbol into a gun that fires it at maximum power seems very counterintuitive to their entire philosophy. And that is probably why it was kept deep hidden in the archives, likely confiscated by the Jedi who originally made it. But technically, it does fulfill our criteria of requiring Kyber technology, constructed and used by a Force wielder, and fundamentally altering the way a lightsaber functions. So we think that it definitely earned a spot among some of the most unusual lightsaber variants. And there you have it, my friends. Lightsabers are easily one of the most powerful handheld weapons in the entire galaxy, being radiant swords of pure energy with the power to cut through almost anything. They require a steady and a disciplined hand. While many weapons may attempt to compete with the almighty lightsaber, few have managed to stand on equal ground, except for other lightsabers, of course. And sometimes, this forces many Jedi and Sith combatants to face a harsh reality. Not all lightsabers are created equally. One of our favorite topics in these archives is to cover the strongest or the strangest Kyber crystals that we can find. And over the years, we've unearthed many extremely powerful crystals that give the user a distinct edge over nearly all other enemies. But for today's video, we didn't just want to talk about the powerful crystals in the galaxy, but rather the outright deadliest. We've tried to select 7 crystals so dangerous that if not properly wielded, they become as much of a detriment to the user as they are to the opponent. Of course, because the subject of all lightsaber crystals is so extremely vast, we invite you to comment any extremely dangerous gems that we may have missed in this video. But now, Acolytes, let's begin. It's hard to begin a discussion about the most powerful lightsabers without paying respect to the Mandalorian's darksaber first. While the make of this crystal and the blade remains completely unknown in the lore, we haven't been given up on analyzing all of its aspects yet, with the hilt made of Beskar, a blade of light-consuming onyx, and having a flat angular design. The darksaber distinguishes itself in a great many categories. The biggest thing that sets it apart still, though, is just how mysterious it is. We currently aren't sure how much of this strange shape are attributed to the connection of the crystal and the make of the hilt. But when speaking about the crystal, we can point to several parts of the design that make it outright dangerous, and a massive strength of the darksaber. The first is the odd magnetic property that the blade possesses. This aspect of the darksaber seems to trip up a lot of Jedi who fight Mandalorian wielders of the weapon. They find their lightsabers being magnetized to the crackling energy blade of the darksaber, making it difficult to slip the defenses or to retreat while engaging in combat. Just like how the darksaber seems to draw in all light into its black edges, it gives it a whiter, brighter glow. It's almost as if the blade draws in other lightsabers as well, catching them within its snare. The second aspect of the blade, however, suggests that the darksaber may be even more powerful than a regular saber is. Revealed in The Mandalorian, the blade has a special reaction when pressed against Beskar. 99% of lightsaber blades glance off of Mandalorian iron without leaving so much as a burn. The darksaber, though, will actually heat up Beskar to the point of glowing. Din Djarin's spear looked as though it would buckle when Moff Gideon locked the darksaber against it, indicating that the crystal produces a more concentrated amount of energy than a normal Kyber crystal does. Either that, or Tar Vizsla included some sort of Mandalorian secret in the weapon's design that made it effective against even his native alloy. This is still a lot of speculation, and a ton of speculation going around about the darksaber, but all signs point towards the black crystal of the weapon holding far more secrets than we currently have answers. The darksaber was not the first lightsaber in Star Wars to produce a blackened edge. There was another, though not quite as fleshed out in concept, it still exists. This was known as the Blackwing crystal, and that is the crystal that was the inspiration for today's video. As the name suggests, these type of crystals were formed when regular Kyber comes into contact with the Blackwing virus. Those who recognize the name remember it as a Sith bioweapon, one that turns living beings into flesh-hungry undead. It was first invented by the Sith Darth Scabarus, who sought a path towards immortality using a ritual, but of course the ritual went horrifically wrong. Finding his notes, our own Darth Sidious would attempt to recreate the alchemical reaction, but would engineer it as an Imperial bioweapon to use against the Rebel Alliance. But aboard the Star Destroyer, which served as the mobile research laboratory, the virus got out and infected the entirety of the ship. But this wasn't the end of the disease, as some managed to make it to Dathomir, infecting a large portion of the planet, which then had to be quarantined. Deep within the quarantine zone caves were undead rancors, these Blackwing virus crystals which had somehow become mutated by the virus. That actually makes a lot of sense though, considering the pathogen was a creation of the dark side, making it force-based as well. When placed within a lightsaber, the Blackwing crystal creates a dark and a smoky ash-colored blade. This is one of the most odd types of lightsabers that we've ever heard about, and unfortunately there isn't much to say about its properties. The reason we decided it needed a place on the list though, was because of its potential to transfer the Blackwing virus. While this has not been explicitly stated, we speculate that the wounds inflicted by the saber has the potential to infect the victim with the undead illness. A zombie lightsaber, guys. If this were true, then this would make it one of the worst kinds of Kyber crystals to ever exist in Star Wars lore. And while this is currently unconfirmed, we invite you to speculate on the uses of the Blackwing lightsaber and what it's really capable of. But now, let's move on to the next lightsaber. The next is known as the Styium crystal. This will be the first of our stealth-centered lightsabers on today's list. The mineral of the lightsaber was traditionally used as the core resource for cloaking devices. Stealth field generators have always been highly experimental technology that only a few ships have ever been equipped with. Even during the era of the Clone Wars, cloaking technology was still in its prototype phase. However, the Sith Darth Tenebrous designed a ship with an array of Styium crystals which gave the vessel perfect invisibility. Invisibility both with scanners and to the naked eye. The ship, the Scimitar, would go on to be handed down to the apprentice of Plagueis, where it was then inherited by Sidious, who of course gave it to Maul. The Styium-based stealth fields became somewhat of a well-kept secret of the Sith, as it was the perfect cloaking technology. Vader would end up giving some of these to Starkiller in the implement of the Rogue Shadow ship, and it was then discovered that the crystals were placed in a lightsaber, that it would actually function, and it gave it the unique properties of the crystal as well. Stealth abilities. When the lightsaber was activated, it would obscure the wielder from sight, and even mute their very footsteps, almost making it the quintessential assassin lightsaber. However, we say almost, because the next crystal is basically better in every way. I'm sure several of you watching this have said, you can't talk about deadly lightsabers without mentioning the Ghostfire crystal. This strange gem almost doesn't exist to the naked eye unless viewed extremely closely. This is because the Ghostfire is nearly entirely transparent, like a perfectly clean piece of glass. They can only be found on a handful of Outer Rim worlds though, normally jutting out of rocky spires of transparent stone. And to make it even more difficult to find, these stones were only found at the peak of mountains, which means that they caught the light, which means that most of the time, they were basically invisible. But when placed within a lightsaber, the Ghostfire produced a white blade. The blade was dim, and far more translucent than other lightsaber blades, which usually give off a lot more light. And instead of a valiant snap hiss of a lightsaber ignition, the Ghostfire gives off almost no sound at all. It's almost as if one were capable of putting a blaster suppressor on a lightsaber emitter, and this is what you would get. And it goes without saying that the saber didn't hum either. but rather had a quiet presence. What makes it so deadly though isn't just its lack of sound, but how the Ghostfire looks. They would produce illusionary afterimages of the blade that followed the motion of the wielder. While on the surface this doesn't seem like a big deal, but it actually disguised the true position of the lightsaber while disorienting an enemy. A truly cunning opponent could cut down lots of competition with the Ghostfire crystal, making it easily one of our favorites and one of the deadliest to exist within the lore. But as for the final 3 crystals, we wish we could have done a countdown towards number 1. However, each one of the final options that we selected are so powerful and deadly that they basically share the final spot. With that said, we need your discernment on which of these deserves the number 1 spot, and which is truly the most powerful. So let's begin with the crystal known as the Barab ingot. The crystal was named after the planet whence it came, Barab 1. The planet was baked in radiation, and its surface was littered with valuable orbs. However, most are not brave enough to attempt to harvest them. Among these orbs is the Barab ingot, which only a few have managed to successfully place in a lightsaber. What resulted was a blade which burned hotter than any other lightsaber. It burned so fiercely, in fact, that it looked unstable, erratic, almost to the point of losing its cohesion. It was like a sword of blazing fire, and it even caused targets struck with it to immediately catch on fire. But what made it so deadly was that the crystal made both the lightsaber hilt and the blade radioactive, calling into question whether or not it's a good idea to expose oneself to such a weapon, much less to actually construct one. But the next Kyber crystal on our list is the Itan crystal. This is one that we've revisited a couple times in the archives, simply because of how devastating it was. It is known as the lightsaber that eats other sabers. Itan crystals are found on the mid-rim world of Itai, and only grow in caverns of over 500 meters below the surface world. More often, one has to actually journey almost 1,000 meters to actually start seeing them in plenty. They already made them difficult to find, but after the destruction of Itai, it became nearly impossible. But once one found the crystal, they would immediately sense that it was different. Itans were known to echo with a humming sound, and were hot to the touch. When incorporated within a lightsaber successfully, they were basically the opposite of the Ghostfire. They were loud, humming with a harmonic resonance to the swing of the blade. When in combat, they would release an almost deafening crack, as well as a flare of energy when clashing with another lightsaber. But the sound was the least of the opponent's troubles. The true nature of an Itan crystal was its tendency to absorb energy. Like the darksaber, other blades would adhere to the Itan's blade, and it would begin to consume them, and the more energy that it consumed, the stronger the blade would grow, and the brighter it would shine. It was hard to find something worse than a vampiric lightsaber crystal, but we have one more that we want to bring to your attention, guys. But now we have the Lignan crystal. This is the last for our list today, and it's not only one of the more powerful crystals, but it comes with a very unique history. Lignan crystals were made out of Lignan ore, which was incredibly potent with, of course, the dark side. The blade produced burned much hotter and lasted much longer than your average lightsaber blade. They were so efficient, in fact, that Luke Skywalker acknowledged their superiority to his own artificial crystal, noting that it was able to cut faster through thick metal doors, faster than any lightsaber that Luke had seen before, and was able to cut completely through a viewport. Not only this, but the crystals enhanced the wielder's natural connection to the dark side. The history of this crystal goes all the way back to 5000 BBY, during the Great Hyperspace War. In this ancient time, the Sith Naga Sitao had ordered for as much of the ore to be mined as possible after finding it on the world of Fagan III. The starship labeled as the Harbinger carried a massive payload of these crystals, but it was intercepted by a Jedi Master. The Jedi, Rarest, and his Padawan, Drev Hassin. While on board the Harbinger though, the Jedi Master sabotaged the hyperdrive with detonators and entered into a duel with the ship's captain, Sayist Rogan. Despite the hyperdrive being shot out though, the captain still attempted to make a jump to hyperspace. Seeing that the ship was about to jump though, the Jedi Padawan sacrificed his life to ram a ship into the command bridge. The Jedi Master watched the entire thing happen in despair, right as the Harbinger began its jump. As a result of this faulty jump though, the Harbinger was caught in the crossroads of hyperspace and real space. The Master found his way to an escape pod, which launched alongside the Harbinger. Meanwhile though, the Sith utilizes the power of the Lignan ore to hold the Harbinger together and eventually yank the ship directly out of hyperspace using the dark side. But when they returned to the galaxy, they discovered that 5,000 years had passed, and they were in the era of Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order in the year of 41 ABY. As the story plays out, the Jedi Master enlists the help of Luke's Jedi, mainly Jade and Kor, who had a vision concerning this exact event. The Jedi would put a stop to this rogue Sith, but at the cost of Rellin falling to the dark side. The Jedi, Rellin Drur, used his despair and his failures, drawing all of his life force and energy within the power of the Lignan crystal, and eventually defeated the Sith, murdering him with the Sith Lord's own lightsaber, felt with anger after the death of his Padawan. But although he had now embraced the dark side, the Jedi Master still sacrificed himself for the greater good. He continued to consume as much of the Lignan crystal's power as he could, and finally unleashed it upon the Harbinger, engulfing the entire ship in flames and destroying it as he passed on. The reason he did this is he stated that nor he nor the ship belonged in this time. Unfortunately though, the ship would crash land on the world of Kesh, which was the home to the lost tribe of the Sith, who ended up getting their hands on a massive payload of the Lignan crystals. When one encounters Grievous, you learn two things right off the bat. He is a cyborg and he kills Jedi. He collects their lightsabers once he's finished as his grand prize, but unlike many other agents of the Sith, Grievous did not build his own weapons and they are not red in coloration. Rather, Grievous takes the lightsabers of his victims and wields them as trophies as he slaughters even more Jedi as a form of an insult. It was this innate hatred of the Jedi that made the Kaleesh warlord even agree to undergo cybernetic modification in the first place. His desire to ensure their suffering and death is the only reason that he lives and the only reason that he fights. To use their own weapons to facilitate his sinister fantasies, just like icing on the cake. Every traditional hunter keeps a memento from their greatest kills, but whose lightsabers did Grievous actually have? It is currently unknown how vast the General's collection actually was. Grievous has had several hundred Jedi kills under his belt in Legends, and it's not always clear whose lightsabers that he's managed to retrieve. However, in today's video, we've done our best to find what lightsabers we can identify as directly being a part of the General's collection. Currently we found around 21, but if you happen to know some that we neglected to mention, we definitely hope that you comment down below so that our list can be completed. And if you like these kinds of lore lists, then be sure to slash that subscribe button to ribbons to join our archives today. We believe the channel would be a fine addition to your collection. Now, let's begin. We've attempted to not only track down whose lightsaber Grievous owns, but also the rough order in which he collected them. Although with this we've decided not to limit ourselves to a single continuity, but cover each one that he's reported to have across both Legends and Canon. In this spirit, we'll start with his very first lightsaber, the one that belonged to the Jedi Master Sifo Dyas. In Canon, Sifo Dyas' lightsaber was recovered by Jedi Master Plo Koon from a wreckage on the moon of Obadiah. But in Legends continuity, Dooku actually kept not only his old friend's body, but also his lightsaber. But the insult would go farther. Dooku would use Sifo Dyas' midichlorian rich blood to transform the being once known as Kai Main Jai Shilal into General Grievous. Several months after this, Dooku would bestow his old friend's lightsaber to Grievous as well, but the gift came with a backhanded remark. Grievous's droid fingers clutched the Jedi weapon for the very first time, and Tyrannus said this: "The Jedi shall fall by their own weapon. No one has ever received a lightsaber as a gift, especially not a droid." A sign of gratitude would not be completely out of place at this moment. Dooku loathed the idea of giving a lightsaber to a cybernetic monstrosity. The very idea besmirched the elegance of the weapon. But Dooku did take pleasure in the symbolism of the Jedi's own weapon being their undoing, just as their arrogance was. But of course, he also wanted to provoke Grievous so that he could show him off to Palpatine. This worked, of course. As soon as Dooku left, Grievous gripped the saber so hard that his hand began to shake. He promptly ignited the weapon and brutally cut down his Magna Guards, and after he screamed out, "I am not a droid," Grievous would attain his second lightsaber during the Battle of Geonosis. This would be technically also his first Jedi kill, and it flew right under the radar due to how many Jedi died that day in the arena. The Jedi Master, or Sema Du, was among 200 Jedi that responded to Mace Windu's call to infiltrate the Geonosian arena, and while her comrades attacked the stands, Sema Du plunged deep into the catacombs below, hoping to find a way to flush out Count Dooku. Unfortunately though, she would be the very first to interact with the Separatists' newest weapon. Like a beast stalking its prey from the shadows, Grievous pounced on the Jedi wildly with an electro staff. He did this because it was not yet time to reveal himself to the Jedi, and he didn't want the Jedi's body bearing any lightsaber wounds. The two fought a very brief battle, before the poor Jedi was struck down, defeated by the General's overwhelming strength. And her lightsaber would be his first true trophy. But this is where the lore gets interesting. Shockingly, the next addition to Grievous's collection was a Sith lightsaber. The exact circumstances in which he acquired it are a little fuzzy though. Grievous is thought to have killed a Dark Jedi on either the planet Dika or Necropolis, and acquired the lightsaber of Darth Zana. The saber staff was nicknamed Bane's Heart because how potent the lightsaber held within was. It is not known who this Dark Jedi was that possessed the ancient weapon of Zana, nor how the weapon came into her possession at all. But what's sad is Grievous either didn't know the historical value of this artifact, or he was too greedy to surrender it to his Sith masters. Grievous kept the lightsaber of Zana close to him, among his personal starfighter and among his other sabers in his collection. All of this would be recovered from his ship during the time of the Empire, and this would all be given to Grievous's clone, NK Necrosis. After Necrosis was defeated though, the Bane's Heart crystal was taken from the droid's body, and what happened to the lightsaber of Zana and the crystal from that point forward in the lore is completely unknown. But what we do know is that Darth Sidious never found them, which is quite interesting because he seems to find basically everything. But back to Jedi weapons. Grievous's grand entrance to the Clone Wars would happen during the horror show known as the Battle of Hypori. It was here where his lightsaber collection would be boosted to new numbers. A strike team of Jedi arrived with a fleet Acclamator-class battleships in order to destroy a massive droid factory, which was reported by Master Dakman Barrack. As the ships emerged from hyperspace, orbital mines caused the majority of the transports to crash behind the Separatist lines. The task force was quickly surrounded by the massive droid army that was stationed on the planet. Following, all of the clone troopers were quickly slaughtered. But it was here when General Grievous emerged, leading a gargantuan platoon of B-2 super battle droids. The Jedi quickly retreated to the crash site of the ships in order to take cover, while Master Barrack sent out a distress signal directly to the nearby Jedi. The signal was eventually picked up by none other than Obi-Wan Kenobi, who would unfortunately witness the death of Master Barrack. As the killing began, in canon, Grievous kills an additional female Jedi here who was left unarmed. And in the Marvel comic Obi-Wan #3, we see that Grievous has not only added the lightsaber of Dakman Barrack, but also the unnamed Jedi's lightsaber to his collection as well, as he only had 2 weapons prior, but now he's seen with 4. And this is when Grievous finally engages the remaining 6 Jedi in the crashed cruiser. Attacking the last group of Jedi, Grievous murders the Padawan Shagi, crushing him with his body. He then seemingly executes the Jedi Kakruk during the ensuing battle. He then uses his feet to grab Aayla Secura and Tar Sayre, flinging them far above into the ceiling. Aayla is knocked out immediately, and Sayre is killed on impact. Grievous then engages Shaak Ti and Ki-Adi-Mundi, managing to throw Ti into a pile of debris before ultimately singling out Mundi alone. Now, there is a strange little switch that happens here. During the fight, Mundi is disarmed of his lightsaber as he attempts to summon it to his hand, but Grievous stomps onto it and grabs it with his feet. Instead, Mundi then pulls a spare lightsaber directly off of Grievous's belt. It is unfortunately unknown whose lightsaber Mundi grabbed here, but it doesn't really matter since he doesn't keep it. The two then begin their duel, as Mundi is eventually disarmed yet again of the saber that he had just grabbed. Luckily though, the lives of the Jedi were saved when the ARC troopers arrived and rained blaster fire and missiles on Grievous. The troopers managed to save Aayla and Shaak Ti, announcing that the rest of the Jedi were dead. Because the 2 women are shown to have their lightsabers shortly after this event though, we assume that the troopers also grabbed their lightsabers as well when retrieving the Jedi. Mundi, however, never got his lightsaber back, as he was forced to escape as soon as the ARCs arrived. After the clones and the Jedi depart, Grievous is shown going around the battlefield collecting the lightsabers of fallen Jedi, specifically wanting Kakruks. So now we can add Tar Sayre, Shaagi's, Ki-Adi-Mundi's lightsaber to his collection as well. And although Kakruk was announced dead here, he actually managed to survive the encounter and would even survive Order 66. As Kakruk appears in the Vader comics much later down the line, and even in Luke Skywalker's New Jedi Order. With that said though, Kakruk either had to rebuild his lightsaber or acquire a new one. The next 2 lightsabers that Grievous added to his collection would be considered his most prized possessions of all. This was because the lightsabers belonged to the 2 Jedi that actually caused his hatred of the Jedi Order in the very beginning. The lightsabers of Techuka Dun and Jamar. For this one, we need backstory, and to keep a long story very short, Kaiman Jai Shila was a member of the warlike Kalish species, a species which lived deep in wild space. For many generations, they were at war with the advanced insectoid race known as the Huck. Ever since he was a young boy, Kaiman Shilal was trained with the rifle by his father to shoot down the Huck invaders, and when he grew to adulthood, he became the fiercest warrior that the Kalish had ever seen. He then partnered up with the female of his species by the name of Ronderu Lij Kumar, who was a master of the sword. The two became very close, nigh inseparable warriors, and with so many kills under their belt, they were treated as demigods among their people. Sadly though, Kumar would eventually be killed in battle against the Huk. Heartbroken, Kaimane would rename himself Grievous, pronouncing that his grief would never end and that it would define him for the rest of his life. He turned his anger and grief towards the Huk, and aided by his elite, Grievous forced the Huk off of Kali and then swarmed their homeworld, conquering all of them. Driven to near extinction, the Huk turned to the Galactic Republic for help, feeding them a doctored account of what was happening. They covered up the fact that they were trying to enslave the Kalish and made it seem as though they were being unfairly massacred wildly. In response, the Jedi would dispatch 2 Jedi Knights to Chukadun and Jamar in order to assess the situation. Without all the proper info though, the Jedi diplomats ruled in favor of the Huk and sent the Kalish back to their world, forcing them to pay heavy wartime reparations. This caused so much financial hardship on Kali that Grievous watched his people begin to starve to death. The 2 Jedi were loathed by the people, and they began to refer to them as the executioner of the Kali. Finally, in the year 20 BBY, in the midst of the Clone Wars, Grievous would find these 2 Jedi. Both men were on a mission to the planet of Vandos, and in addition to them was Dun's Padawan, Flynn Kybo. They would all be ambushed by B-2 super battle droids, and their entire clone company was massacred. Leading the assault was Grievous, who then engaged with the Jedi. Dun and Jamar engaged the Grievous in order to give time for the rest of their company to escape. The young Jedi Flynn would watch as Grievous easily murdered Jamar, but the young Padawan's Jedi Master would meet a much more grisly fate. Using 2 lightsabers like a pair of scissors, Grievous hacked Chukadun into 3 pieces with a single maneuver. Afterwards, he took their lightsabers and treasured them above all others in his collection, a sign of his revenge. He even carried Jamar's green lightsaber with him just about everywhere that he went, and it is known that he did use this lightsaber in his battle against Obi-Wan on Utapau. Later though, Flynn Kybo and Bedard Tone would attempt to get revenge on Grievous for the slaying of the Jedi. But while they both ended up dying to the droid general, Flynn used the last moments of his life to set off a massive bomb. All 3 of them were at the heart of the detonation, and we don't believe their lightsabers would have survived this explosion, so we won't count them. But if you disagree, then you can count them if you wish. Soon Bates was next on our list. He was escorting Bail Organa deep into the unknown regions, where they were shot down by a separatist blockade over the world of Baz Pity. But whenever they crash-landed, Boone Bates attempted to escort Organa out, trying to find a way to break the blockade on the world. Unfortunately though, he would run headfirst into General Grievous. This Jedi dies extremely quickly. Grievous grabbed his head and crushed it in his fist. He then picked up the fallen Jedi's lightsaber and used it to slaughter the remaining company of clones. Definitely one of the General's more brutal kills. The next saber to be added to the collection once belonged to Jedi Master Karmal. He was a very controversial Jedi of the Order. This was because he had gone directly against the Jedi Code. The Jedi had attempted to take an entire clan of Jedi younglings to all be his Padawans. He took then 10 initiates aboard a capital ship and attempted to train each of them himself, going directly against the wishes of the High Council. But the ship would be boarded by Grievous and a small contingent of B-1 battle droids. The Jedi Karmal attempted to engage the droids, but he was overwhelmed by their firepower and was shot down very quickly. This was not some grand prize of Grievous, who simply walked by and collected his lightsaber before moving on. Miraculously though, the Jedi did not die here, but managed to survive the Clone Wars as well. He would eventually be captured by none other than Darth Sidious. Sidious, who sensed the dark side in the Jedi, the Emperor tortured, and turned the Jedi to the darkness simply for his own amusement. But back to Grievous. At some point in the Clone Wars, Grievous also acquired the lightsaber of Master Nebo. He had gone missing on a mission to the moons of Sanjin. He had not been seen for some time, but his fate was made abundantly clear when the Jedi Master Kit Fisto found his lightsaber within the lair of Grievous. The next 7 lightsabers were all gathered by the General in very quick succession during the Battle of Coruscant. A team of Jedi consisting of Shak Ti, Fal Maudama, Reth Del Masona, Roron Korob, and Bink Utrilla all had attempted to protect Chancellor Palpatine from Grievous. After taking the Chancellor from his office, it would be Shak Ti who would stay behind and fend off the Magna Guards. Ti then ordered the rest to take Palpatine and escape. In the 2003 Clone Wars series, it is Modama and Korob with Palpatine, but in the Labyrinth of Evil novel, it is Masona and Utrilla. Masona was known as a brave Jedi who fought in the Battle of Geonosis, and managed to live 3 years of the Clone Wars. Masona was a renowned duelist, famous for his mastery of Form 4 Ataru, the same lightsaber form as Yoda and Qui-Gon Jinn. Masona, along with the others, managed to rush Palpatine to an underground panic bunker, but they were soon sniffed out by the General. Unfortunately though, he was the very first casualty of the duel that ensued. With his blinding speed, Grievous decapitated Masona instantly. It was at this point in the duel that Grievous unveiled his 4 arms, and brutally attacked the remaining Jedi. Korab, the powerful Ithorian Jedi Master, was the next to be murdered. The Jedi became distracted when Grievous dodged his attack and it inadvertently hit his comrade. Grievous, seeing this millisecond of an opening, struck definitively. Foul and the male Tals would be the next Jedi to die. Grievous had shocked the younger Jedi by just how quickly he had taken out the masters around them. Taz's death was especially shocking because his body was extremely large, and Foul was known as an accomplished swordsman and respected for his fluid lightsaber technique. But they were all nothing in the face of Grievous. It was Utrilla, the Twi'lek Jedi Master, that managed to last the longest against the droid. Despite the horrendous deaths of her comrades though, she kept a level head and even managed to score a few hits on the General's body. She even pressed an offensive attack, attempting to take out many of Grievous's limbs, but he saw this coming and responded by stabbing her right in the heart. At this point, Shaak Ti had finally arrived. The Magna Guards had backed away from her, informing her that her companions had failed and that the Chancellor was being taken. The council member arrived right as Grievous was going to leave, and Ti attempted to stop him with a wild charge, but was easily caught by her neck and relieved of her lightsaber. Grievous then electrocuted her with his hidden cables, and presumably collected the lightsabers left behind by his other victims. Above the skies of Coruscant, as the battleships raged on, the General would be pursued by even more Jedi. Surprisingly, Anakin and Obi-Wan were not the first Jedi to land on the Invisible Hand. The first was the Jedi Ongri, Master Pablo Gil, and the Jedi Temple Quartermaster, Lacielo Sajun. The 2 Jedi raced towards the flagship and got caught in its tractor beam. As they landed in the hangar bay and defended themselves from a hailfire of 100 battle droids, Grievous soon arrived on the scene to deal with them himself, as all of the droids stopped firing to avoid their leader. A duel then ensued, and admittedly, Pablo and Sagan lasted a considerable amount of time against the General. Grievous even acknowledged that they were both worthy Jedi opponents, but ultimately, they were no match for his staggering speed and agility. The Jedi would die together in a twin stab from Grievous, as he skewered them both in a single move. He then collected their lightsabers before ordering their bodies to be jettisoned from the airlock as a warning to the Republic. Let's now switch over to rapid fire mode, considering Grievous's collection. At one point, he had 4 lightsabers in his possession that didn't remain with him for very long. These lightsabers belonged to Adi Gallia and Eth Koth, both of whom had their lightsabers taken by Grievous when he captured them. Fortunately for them though, they would retrieve their lightsabers when they were freed. Grievous also had the lightsaber of Nadar Veb very briefly after he killed the Mon Calamari Jedi, but it was taken back by the Jedi's master, Kit Fisto. And then of course, Grievous had Obi-Wan and Anakin sabers for about a minute on the Invisible Hand. But these were all of the lightsabers in Grievous's collection that we were able to assemble. Like we mentioned earlier, there's a real chance that we could be missing a few. It's safe to assume that he collected many more lightsabers from many unnamed Jedi that he murdered. However, these were the sabers that he was most well known for, and the ones that we could confirm that he wielded. How exactly did Luke Skywalker construct his green lightsaber? And how did he almost die doing it? In one of the most traumatic moments of Luke's life, Luke would lose both his right hand and his father's lightsaber over the chasm of Cloud City, both of these things being just before he received the devastating, galaxy-altering news that he was the son of Lord Vader. After successfully escaping Bespin, Luke decided to continue his journey into becoming a Jedi. However, he now faced a problem. He no longer had the Jedi's weapon. The saber that had been gifted to him by Obi-Wan Kenobi was special, not just because it was a relic from the Clone Wars that belonged to his father, but because it might have been one of the last accessible lightsabers in the galaxy as far as Luke knew. He would have to start from scratch like the Jedi of old, and build a lightsaber for himself, eventually constructing the emerald green blade that we all associate with Luke. But what was the exact process that Luke went through to build this lightsaber in a galaxy ruled by the Empire, who intentionally deprived the galaxy of the resources needed to build this legendary weapon? How did Luke manage to create one completely on his own from scratch? Well, today, join us as we sit and open a holocron and discover the truth together. Welcome, acolytes, to the archives, and let us begin. Immediately after the events of Cloud City,
Luke, Leia, and the rest of the crew only had one objective: to rescue Han Solo from Boba Fett. The journey of the bounty hunter was no simple trip across hyperspace from Bespin to Tatooine. In both canon and legends, there would be a significant amount of time where the group chased Boba Fett around the galaxy, attempting to rescue Han, only to fail time and time again. After another of these failures, Luke had the idea to stake out on Tatooine in an attempt to intercept Boba once he arrived to meet with Jabba. After arriving back on Tatooine personally, Luke decided that the only place suitable for him to hide was the hut of old Ben Kenobi, his Jedi Master, which still stood strong in the Dune Sea. Luke had chosen this place as his hideout for more than just secrecy though. He hadn't seen Ben's ghost since Dagobah, and he had hoped that if he couldn't get his master to appear before him, then he may at least be able to find something that Ben had left behind. Little did Luke know that this was definitely the Force guiding him, or perhaps Obi-Wan guiding him from within the Force itself. Upon entering Obi-Wan's hut, Luke didn't find anything at first. Unsurprisingly, a Jedi Master didn't exactly have many possessions to leave behind, and anything that may have been there had probably been taken by looters. But what Luke did find was worth far more than anything that he could have ever imagined. Hidden in a secret compartment in the floor was what appeared to be a large box made of boa wood, but it was actually a lockbox protected with a keypad. Luke attempted and failed to open it multiple times in different ways, before finding that it had a fingerprint scanner already loaded with Luke's own DNA. Once he opened the box, he was definitely glad that he had, and no one else had located it. Ben had rigged it with a flash packet that would have burst open, and the entire thing would have burst into flames had anyone attempted to open it that didn't belong. The box contained several things within, but the most important among them was a leather-bound journal and instructions for building a lightsaber. The book is the legendary journal of Obi-Wan Kenobi that would teach Luke everything about the Clone Wars and many important histories of what came before in the Jedi. But relevant to our own holocron today were the instructions of the Green Blade. Luke immediately got to work after reading the instructions. The design of the hilt was pretty much identical to Obi-Wan's third lightsaber, since that is the one that Kenobi used for the blueprint. It was as if Ben Kenobi knew that Luke might lose his father's lightsaber one day, or perhaps Obi-Wan thought that he would be unwilling to use it after learning the truth of Anakin and the dark deeds of the weapon's past. Either way, Luke was grateful that he had found these blueprints, and he made sure to strenuously follow the instructions line by line. Luckily for Luke, just about everything he needed for his lightsaber could be found on various vendors from Mos Eisley. From then, Luke was able to acquire necessary components such as power cells, controls, a high-energy reflector cup, and a focusing lens. For the outer coverings of the lightsaber, Luke used mostly starship parts, and would even use raw materials to construct and blacksmith his own outer covering. In truth, the wiring of a lightsaber was pretty standard, but it was the way one had to arrange the wiring that made it very tricky. The real challenge, though, was finding the one resource that was nigh impossible to acquire in that day's galaxy. Of course, the Kyber crystal. Even in a galaxy that didn't have the oppression of the Empire, Luke had no idea where to look for a crystal. But luckily, Obi-Wan had accounted for this as well. Within the instructions, Obi-Wan made it clear that he much preferred naturally occurring crystals, as he believed that they were best suited for a Jedi's purpose. But in Luke's unique situation, Obi-Wan included instructions on how to craft a synthetic lightsaber crystal, a common practice of the Sith, not the Jedi. Most associate the synthetic crystals with the Sith, and in Legends, just about every red crystal was synthesized. The Sith believed that their created crystals were stronger, and they technically were, as they were created to vibrate exclusively with the dark side when activated. But not all synthetic crystals were dark side in nature, which was the beauty of crafting one's own jewel. We've made a lot of holocrons on this channel about the various kinds of natural crystals, but synthetic crystals are just as fascinating because, of course, they are crafted to the user's unique specifications, and they're surprisingly very simple to make. In the ancient days of the galaxy, the Sith had invented an entire compressor machine to basically recreate the geological process that created lightsaber crystals. But Luke had to do it the real old-fashioned way, with raw elements, a small furnace inside of Obi-Wan Kenobi's hut, and extreme patience. The process of making a synthetic crystal required minerals with a high carbon concentration, and Luke would put these elements into the furnace in order to cook from anywhere between 1 to 4 days. During that time, Luke would meditate to bring the elements together as one, infusing it with the light side of the Force itself and the Jedi will. More experienced Force wielders would actually know that during this meditation process, the creator of the crystal could guide the formation process in order to increase the potency of the blade. This extreme level of control that one had over their own crystal forming process allowed them to actually craft it to have very unique traits of their own desire. This made synthetic crystals just as connected to the user as a naturally selected crystal would have been. After the baking process, Luke meticulously cut and polished the gem into the shape that he needed it, being careful to do so, as one wrong tap with a shearing tool and he would have shattered his new lightsaber crystal entirely. Luke mentions that although a lightsaber can be crafted with up to 3 crystals of varying density in order to provide the weapon with different intensity switches, Luke decides to keep things simple for his first lightsaber and only used 1 crystal. Now that Luke's crystal was made, all that was left was to install it and bring the lightsaber together. This was the most difficult part of the entire process. There was no exact formula for the crucial alignment of the crystal, but they must be aligned by hand or extremely precise telekinesis. This is why most Force wielders prefer to meditate when constructing their lightsaber, as they are in a deep state of hyper-awareness and focus, which allows them to make these tiny precision-based connections. The slightest misalignment will cause the weapon to detonate upon activation, and it could even kill the constructor of the lightsaber. This is why all attempts to mechanize the assembly process of the lightsaber were completely unsuccessful, as the builder has to align it in the way that best suits their own weapon. From what we know, Luke did a combination of assembly both by hand and meditation in order to tune into the photo harmonics. It was said that Jedi Masters could build a lightsaber in a matter of days. Luke, however, being far from a Jedi Master at this point, took almost a month to complete his lightsaber. All the while, he was double and triple checking each and every step. His biggest concern was that he would switch on the lightsaber and be instantly vaporized because he hadn't tuned it quite right. Finally, the day would come when the lightsaber was complete, and Luke was ready to give it its first test. We will now hand it over to Master Skywalker's own account of what happened next. When I finally completed the lightsaber, I took it outside Obi-Wan's house. Only R2-D2 was there with me at the time, and I told him to go back inside. It may sound ridiculous, but I thought if something went wrong, I needed someone to tell Leia that Luke Skywalker, the galaxy's biggest idiot, had flash-flamed himself into a black crisp because he couldn't follow an elementary circuit program. I waited until R2 was out of sight before I pushed the control button. I felt both relief and satisfaction when the blade ignited as I expected. I waved it experimentally to find that it had a very good balance, maybe even better than my first lightsaber. Holding one hand near the blade, I felt no sensation of heat, which meant the conductors were working well. I tested the blade by whipping it down at an angle to cleave through a wrist-thick chunk of rock. It passed through the rock easily, leaving behind a smooth cut. Luke would go on to say that while the balance of his lightsaber was superior to that of Anakin's, he didn't believe that he had any distinct advantages because of it in his fight with Vader. However, Luke was far more in tune with the crystal in his own lightsaber than that of Anakin's. He had been the one to craft it, to give it life to his own unique specifications, and in the case of the Jedi, can be just as good as connecting with a natural crystal. It was because of this that Luke would go on to teach his students that so long as they feel connected to their blade through the Force, any kind of crystal or gem would work perfectly inside of a lightsaber. But now, after a month of strenuous work, Luke had finished his final weapon. He would be delayed at some point during the process, as Leia and the gang believed that they had found a way to catch up to Boba. However, this mission was also a failure, so Luke would return to Tatooine to finish the blade. Interestingly, he had only finished his lightsaber mere days before the events of Return of the Jedi, where it would be seen in action in the final confrontation with the dark side of the Force. Unknowingly, Luke had crafted a beautiful weapon, a fine lightsaber worthy of a Clone Wars era Jedi, if not better. Even Darth Vader admired its construction when holding it in his hands, pleased that his son had come so far in his journey in the Force. Seeing the saber showed Vader how clever, mature, and powerful Luke had grown, which gave him a sense of pride as he watched Luke stand against Palpatine within the throne room. But anyway, a fascinating question to pose to you today. Can you make a lightsaber out of anything?
Welcome back, students of the Force, and to the archives. We've been expecting you. For thousands upon thousands of years, the lightsaber has been recognized as a noble weapon, one which requires intentions with both its construct and its use. Both the Jedi and Sith treat the construction of this weapon as an important step in their journey, and these Padawans, or acolytes, must find a very specific list of material in which to construct their lightsaber. But there have been cases in the lore where a Jedi have chosen to personalize their weapon beyond the norm. Other times they were forced to improvise a lightsaber or a Kyber crystal in some sort of a survival situation. But our researchers have come across lightsabers today made of increasingly questionable material and of stranger, more complex design. So we pose the question, can a lightsaber really be made of just about anything? So today, we put together a small list of some of the strangest lightsabers made of some of the strangest material that we could find in the Star Wars lore. So by the way, if you happen to know an oddly crafted lightsaber that we do not mention here, please comment it down below. We at the archives too always love learning more about the lore. We felt it necessary to start our list with a more familiar lightsaber, the lightsaber wielded by the Jedi Padawan Gungi. While force sensitivity is rare among the people, the Wookiees are innately connected to the trees of Kashyyyk on a spiritual level. They consider the Worshur trees to be sacred, since they have a sort of sentience of their own. From a young age, the Wookiees are taught how to commune with the trees, to gain wisdom by listening. To this end, Gungi crafted his lightsaber from the hilt of the wood of a brylark tree. As a Wookiee, Gungi believed that this lightsaber would give him a clear connection to the living force. His hand would almost always be connected with the wood no matter where he went. This was especially helpful since he lived on the world of Coruscant. Master Hu Yang mentions that the only wood of the brylark tree was as strong as metal, which was how Gungi was able to create a lightsaber that wouldn't just go up in flames when activated. And appropriately for the young Jedi, it emitted a green blade, signifying Gungi's trust and reliance on the Force. With that said, it's time for things to get weird. From this point forward in the video will be entirely Star Wars legends, and all of the lightsabers were constructed by students of Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy. The days of the Kyber crystals and proper lightsaber material were exceedingly rare in Luke's Jedi Order. This forced Luke to be very creative in how he constructed his lightsabers, and how he went about teaching his students how to construct their own. Not only this, the Jedi were also a lot more individualistic of this era due to Luke. In the realm of lightsaber crafting of organic material, Gungi was not alone, and a Jedi of Luke's order by the name of Ten Nel Kajo decided to craft her lightsaber out of a Rancor's tooth. Her great-grandmother, Ogwen, was famous for taming the Rancors, and actually kept a lot of them as pets, and apparently the grandmother had one of her favorites. This Rancor produced smaller teeth which were passed down through the generations of the family as heirlooms, and so Luke Skywalker's student decided to use this Rancor teeth as an item in which to craft her lightsaber. She carved intricate battle etchings into the hilt, then applied a black paste made of dampening volcanic sand, and polished the tooth until it brought back the carvings into sharp relief. Unfortunately though, she had used a faulty crystal from a nearby volcano, and not to mention the tooth cavity was much too small for the electronics of the weapon, causing them to be crowded within the tooth. Because of the poor crystal and the unideal arrangement, the resulting blade was a dull gray and very unstable in nature. However, the Jedi addressed this problem, as she believed that it could be amended and that her skills as a warrior would be proven. And although Luke Skywalker disagreed, he allowed his student to take her chosen path. The Jedi would soon learn, however, that tuning a lightsaber was paramount to wielding it safely, and during one of her sparring sessions with Djem So, her lightsaber's power source overloaded in the middle of a blade lock, causing the blade to short out entirely. Because Jason had been actively pushing against her lightsaber, he accidentally severed her left arm when the blade vanished. The Rancor Tooth lightsaber then exploded on the ground. Jo was filled with such shame that she decided to depart from the Jedi Order after this, realizing she had not listened to the teachings of the Jedi Master and had now suffered the consequences, bringing great shame to not only herself, but Luke. However, Jo would again one day return and continue her Jedi training. She never gave up on her original design of a lightsaber either, and traveled to Dathomir to recover a new Rancor tooth. Now having a new mechanical arm, she selected her crystal far more carefully, selecting a Galeronian rainbow gem picked out of the crown remains from her royal heritage. This time, the crystal was stable, and the blade produced was turquoise in coloration. Her choice of an heirloom gem from a tiara, however, was not the first time that Luke Skywalker's students had to substitute Kyber crystals. Those kinds of crystals were in dramatically short supply in the days after the Empire, so oftentimes, the apprentices of the new Jedi Order would find fill-ins for the traditional crystal. Here is a recorded holocron segment of Luke Skywalker talking about this very thing. One of the other crucial pieces is a focusing crystal. The most powerful and sought after gems are rare Kyber crystals. However, though lightsabers are powerful weapons, their design is so flexible that practically any kind of crystal can be used. And since I don't happen to have a stash of Kyber crystals, you'll have to make do with something else of your own choosing. One of my students, Sil Gal, a Mon Calamari like Admiral Akbar, made her lightsaber with smooth curves and protrusions, as if the handle had been grown from metallic coral. She used a rare Ultima Pearl, one of the treasures found in the seabeds of her watery planet. Directly from the mouth of Grandmaster Luke Skywalker, it is said that any kind of crystal or gem can be used in a lightsaber, though doing so may result in strange effects depending on the crystal used. However, the Jedi that he mentions here decided to use a pearl from her homeworld. It is said that properly instilling a Ultima Pearl requires considerable skill. The last person known to have potentially used such a treasure in their hilt was actually Revan, who at one point used a Krayt Dragon Pearl in his lightsaber for a short period of time. By the way, we may say he might have, because using a Krayt Dragon Pearl in your lightsaber is a player choice in the game. There isn't anything in Legends to suggest that Revan definitely did use it, but it is one of the options that is presented. At any rate, the use of a pearl in the game in place of a crystal is actually one of the strangest ones you could choose, although it's one that I am a big fan of. Using odd replacements for crystals is necessary when your back is against the wall. During the Yuzhong Vong War, Anakin Solo was searching for another student by the name of Vela, tracking her down to Yavin 4, which was currently occupied by the Vong. His lightsaber's focusing crystal was damaged at the time, so the young Anakin disguised himself as a slave to infiltrate the compound. His mission became clear as he was assigned to harvest Vong lambents, who were living crystals that provided illumination when stimulated by telepathic energy. It required 2 full days of meditation, but Anakin Solo attuned himself to the crystal of the Vong and used it to repair his lightsaber. Following this though, Anakin learned that his attunement to the crystal enabled him to have a vague awareness of nearby Yuzhong Vong, who had previously been undetectable in the Force. While a Vong lightsaber crystal is compelling, there is only one person who wears the crown of an improvised lightsaber, and that is Corran Horn. Corran Horn literally had a rigged together lightsaber made of literal trash. The lightsaber of Corran Horn is one of the biggest reasons we wanted to make this video. Corran had infiltrated a pirate gang and had nothing to defend himself except for the scrap in a junkyard that he had on hand, and his only instructions were those recorded by his grandfather. For his crystals, he had 3 options: an emerald, a Durinfire jewel, and a diamond. All of them were meant to decorate an old bottle of Savarine brandy. For the electronics, he used a Dynoric laser feed line from a broken blaster cannon, and a throttle assembly and a handlebar lube for a junker speeder bike. And of course, to power the thing, it only required a basic power cell, which was very easy to find. At this point, Corran Horn hadn't been a Jedi for very long at all, but this process of rigging together a lightsaber out of the Star Wars equivalent of spit and duct tape helped push him through his internal struggles, and Corran would indeed become a powerful Jedi. But
What happened to the famous lightsaber of Obi-Wan Kenobi following his duel with Vader and his transition into the realm of the Force? Greetings Acolytes, and welcome back to the archives. The third lightsaber of Obi-Wan Kenobi was his most recognizable, having been constructed after he lost his second one on Geonosis. This new lightsaber design would better suit Kenobi's change in form to Surisu, and be solidified as the symbol of his change from being Qui-Gon Jinn's apprentice to being a full-blown Jedi Master of his own. For the remainder of the Clone Wars into exile, this would be Kenobi's lightsaber that traveled with him until he met his end at the hand of Darth Vader on the Death Star. But the very last time we see Kenobi's iconic lightsaber, it fell lifelessly to the floor once Obi-Wan transcended into the Force, cushioning its fall with the empty cloak of the Jedi. So what happened to the lightsaber after this? Did its adventures end with the death of its owner? Not so, my friends. So join us today as we open a holocron and discover exactly what happened to the lightsaber of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Darth Vader would stare, stunned, confused, and terrified at the empty cloak of the former Jedi. He suddenly had sensed Obi-Wan's presence fill the air around him, and then vanish. Vader originally thought that this was some sort of trick, or a trap of some sort. Obi-Wan had just completely dropped his defenses for no reason before Vader struck him down. But not only did Obi-Wan not have the knowledge to cast such an illusion, Vader felt him die in the Force. His life was extinguished, but there was no explanation for this disappearance. Perhaps it was just a foolish old man's self-sacrifice to delay the inevitable. However, there would be time enough for Vader to ponder on this later. He had finally killed the man who plagued his memories and dreams for years. And just like how Obi-Wan took Anakin's lightsaber on Mustafar, Vader would do the same and claim the weapon of the Jedi. It's assumed that Vader actually kept the lightsaber with him for the remainder of the events of A New Hope. Since Obi-Wan's lightsaber actually survives the explosion of the Death Star, this means that Vader didn't keep it in his quarters on the battle station. Instead, Vader likely either kept it on his person or on his Star Destroyer. The latter is the more likely option, and at some point after the Battle of Yavin, Vader would return to his castle on the world of Bast. As a refresher, this would be Vader's main place of residence in Legends continuity. At least it was around the time of the reign of the Empire. Vader's Bast castle was located on the planet of Vajun, and it actually once belonged to Count Dooku, who used it as a temporary headquarters during the early days of the Clone War. Vader would claim it later in life, and build over the top of the castle that suited his own tastes. It was here, in this dark place, that Vader kept 3 specific items: a Jedi holocron of unknown origin, a small, handheld hologram picture of Luke Skywalker, and the lightsaber of Obi-Wan Kenobi. We never truly get a view of Vader inside of the castle of Vajun, and we especially don't ever see him interacting with any of these 3 objects. All of this was discovered post-mortem by Vader's grandchild, Anakin Solo. It wouldn't be until the year 22 ABY that Obi-Wan's lightsaber would make its next appearance. A group of Jedi from Luke Skywalker's academy would be dispatched into the galaxy to seek out and collect Jedi relics. The group consisted of the Jedi historian Tione Solasar, Master Ikrit, Anakin Solo, and 2 other prospective Jedi students, one of which was named Older Locket. Believing the castle to be abandoned and therefore safe to enter, their only concern was the various traps laid out all over the fortress by Vader. What they didn't know though was that their plans had happened to coincide with that of a man by the name of Orlok, a supposed mage of the dark side who desired to get his hands on Obi-Wan's lightsaber as well as the Jedi holocron. Orlok called himself a mage, but in fact had absolutely no powers, magic, or even a connection to the Force. He was a charlatan who used technology and machinery hidden within his robes to simulate magic and abilities to touch the Force. This pretender, though, had managed to locate both the lightsaber and the holocron before the Jedi did. But right before he made his escape, he was stopped by one of the young learners. This student was a boy brought to Luke who only had the slightest marginality of Force sensitivity. However, his connection to the Force was so insignificant that it didn't appear as though he was going to be able to become a Jedi. Despite this though, the young Jedi Older decided to try to prove that Grandmaster Luke was wrong, and the young learner believed that recovering Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber would prove that he was worthy of becoming a Jedi. However, when he came face to face with the false mage, Orlok fooled the boy into thinking that he actually had the ability to touch the Force. He also promised the young boy an easier path to use the gift of the Force, and to become as powerful as he has always wanted, to teach him things that the Jedi never would. The young boy was dubious, but ended up believing him, though before he could accept the charlatan's offer, the rest of the Jedi burst into the room. After a brief battle, Master Ikrit and Tione managed to pull the lightsaber and the holocron from the mage's grasp. Defeating him and surrounding him, the magician made a grand escape in a puff of smoke. Both items would be brought back directly to Luke's Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4, where they were put in Luke's chambers to be examined. But the young Jedi, having been discouraged for the final time from yet another failed test, decided that the only way to get the power that he wanted was to accept the offer of Orlok. So, the young Jedi perspective snuck into Luke's room, stole the holocron and Obi-Wan's lightsaber, and then made off towards the abandoned Exis station, where he knew that Orlok said he would be hiding. At the station, Orlok had the entire place wired with machinery, technology, speakers, and holograms. The entire location controlled by silvery beads within his cloak. With these beads, he could trick anyone that he actually had the power of the Force within his own lair. Mesmerized, the young Jedi prospect gave the tokens to the false mage, who placed Obi-Wan's lightsaber on his belt directly. He then began to train the boy by giving him superficial advice on clearing his mind, telling him to do something such as lift and lower objects. Whenever the boy took Orlok's advice, the mage would simply control the electronics in the station to make it look like the boy had actually moved something. Eventually though, the previous group of Jedi would make their way to the station as well in order to not only rescue the boy, but to reclaim the lightsaber of the Jedi Master Kenobi. There was a struggle at the station, as Orlok used many of his tricks to make it look as though he and Uldur were conjuring storms and manipulating the Force on an advanced level. All the while, he clumsily swung Obi-Wan's lightsaber around in order to intimidate the children. However, the final battle happened when Anakin Solo discovered the central control room where Orlok was making all of his fake magic occur. During the battle, Anakin managed to reclaim Obi-Wan's lightsaber from Orlok's belt and used it to slash the liar's cloak, damaging the control circuits and revealing to the young Jedi his trickery. Now defeated, and with no more tricks, Orlok escaped again in a puff of smoke, but this time, he would never return. Anakin and his friends returned to Yavin 4, where the young Jedi had realized all of the mistakes that he had made and promised to apologize to Luke, and that Obi-Wan's lightsaber would be placed back firmly with the Grand Master. This would be the very last time that Obi-Wan's lightsaber would be seen or mentioned in all of Legends lore. We can assume that either Luke kept it on display or had it with him in his own chambers to remember his master fondly. However, the lightsaber had a grand impact on the young Anakin Solo. Since it had been one of the first lightsabers that he actually used, it made a big impression on him, and Anakin would loosely model the design of his first lightsaber after that of Obi-Wan's, just like Grandmaster Luke did. But anyway,
the most powerful Kyber crystal in the galaxy is nothing what you would expect it to be. Within the history of the Jedi and Sith, very few objects are quite as significant as that of the Kyber crystals. Innately connected to the Force, they used lightsabers within alchemical experiments, and even super weapons. It's difficult to see the development of the respective orders without these gems being a part of it. But what may be the most powerful of all of these minerals is not the kind of Kyber that is found in lightsabers. It is spelled K-Y-B-E-R, but a singular, distinct Kyber crystal, the spelling being K-A-I-B-U-R-R, as confusing as it may be, will actually become very clear at the end of this holocron. In today's holocron, we are going to be talking about the very first Kyber crystal, which would have been the most powerful in the entire galaxy. Crystal lore is something of our favorites to get into here at the archives, so today's dive will be quite special, since we're finally talking about the crystal that began it all. But before we switch our headlamps on and plumb deep into the mines, the crystals whisper to us that a few strangers are among our midst. Some of you joining us have not yet subscribed, so if you find yourself in a thirst for knowledge about the galaxy far, far away, be sure to reach out with the Force and crush that subscribe button to become notified when we upload every single day, nearly. So now, Acolytes, let us begin. In Legends, the Kyber crystal first appeared on the planet of Sir-Karpus V, also known as Mimban, in the possession of an ancient race. The cultists on the world devoted themselves entirely to their god by the name of Pomo Gemma. They seem to have believed that their god created this crystal due to its powerful healing capabilities. This was one of the foremost powers of the Kyber, its uncanny ability to heal beings back from the very brink of death. The ancient Mimbanites of the world used the crystal to tap into the Force and heal all sorts of injuries and ailments that afflicted their people. They kept the large crystal within a temple to their minor god, resting within the chest of its statue. But as the eons wore on, this ancient race died out by unknown means, and the temple became overgrown and forgotten. Though at some point, shards of the Kyber had been carved from the main crystal. Only a few of these shards, known as splinters, could actually be found in the galaxy. And according to Luke Skywalker, these splinters were able to create the most powerful type of lightsaber possible. Each splinter held an equivalent fraction of the main crystal's power, and they had amazing properties. They increased one's perception of the Force, magnifying, clarifying it several times over in proportion to the splinter's size. Anytime a Force sensitive came into contact with a shard or the main Kyber crystal, they would glow brightly and hum within the Force itself. and this is all due to the insane abilities of the Kyber. The amazing healing capabilities only scratched the surface. The main crystal itself had the ability to magnify one's power in the Force almost 1,000 times over. Even splinters had this ability in proportion to their size and density. The powers of the Kyber were so potent that they could enable Force users to temporarily gain access to abilities that shouldn't be physically possible. Case in point, when Darth Vader got his hands on the crystal. Vader was then able to actually manifest Force lightning. This is despite his suit's metal and technology making this typically impossible for him to do successfully. But for just a moment, while in contact with the crystal, Vader was essentially able to access what would have been his power without the suit. He was able to instinctively create a ball of Force lightning that he summoned and launched it as a terrifyingly powerful projectile. This ability would later get a name in the lore known as kinetite. However, the crystal came with a couple important drawbacks that we have to note. Although it was insanely strong in the Force, it did have some adverse effects of those who were not sufficiently powerful to wield it. When Vader interacted with the crystal, his strength in the Force was increased so much that he lost control of himself. Even though he had wanted to capture Luke and Leia alive, he ended up attacking them with lethal intent. Once Luke managed to get the crystal away from Vader though, he was able to heal both himself and Leia from the brink of certain death. It also seems that the Kyber empowers all Force sensitives within its vicinity as well, and not just the one in direct contact with it. This seems to be the case when Luke was shown to actually fight Vader despite being only a post-Yavin version. By all accounts, Luke at this point in the timeline should have been completely incinerated by Vader, but the aura exuding from the crystal was so potent that not only was it able to increase his own power, but also the ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi, as Kenobi was able to hold Vader back through Luke's body, essentially empowering the young boy with skills of a Jedi Master temporarily. Using this, Luke was able to deflect Vader's lightning and sever his right arm, causing him to fall deep within a pit. I almost like to think of this moment as the ultimate version of Obi-Wan battling the ultimate version of Vader. I know those stats aren't exactly accurate, but it's an interesting thought to entertain. Anyway, Lord Vader had likely desired the crystal as a means to overthrow Sidious. After all, it could basically restore him back to an unsuited state if he had it with him. However, the trade-offs was that it eroded and overshadowed his own willpower. Vader is the kind of Sith that believes overwhelming power is useless if it cannot be controlled. So once he climbed his way out of the pit, he decided that he would just leave the crystal there. But of course, this was probably the best anyway due to the second drawback of the crystal, which is far more glaring of an issue. The Kyber's potency in the Force was directly affected by its proximity to the temple, the very temple of Pomo Gemma. The main crystal and all of its splinters would progressively get weaker and weaker the further one took it away from the temple. And it was basically powerless once it was taken off of the world of Minban. It was only made extremely dangerous yet again when it was introduced into lightsaber construction, as its properties as a focusing crystal were still quite powerful and potent. Once Luke Skywalker learned this, he decided that he would take the Kyber with him so that it would stay out of evil hands forever. By now, the Empire had already figured out the location of the Temple of Pomo Gemma, and they could still do something terrible if they could find the Kyber and weaponize it. Luke would actually keep the crystal with him long after he started the Jedi Order and the Jedi Praxium, wherein he would use the Kyber crystal as a teaching tool. Vader did end up keeping one splinter for himself though, which was essentially passed on to Lady Lumaya, who used it in the construction of her light whip. An interesting bit of Legends lore there. This staggeringly powerful relic comes to us from the classic Legends novel Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Now when we say this crystal was the very first Kyber, we didn't mean in lore. Out of universe, the crystal holds an extremely special place in Star Wars history. This is the very first time that the name Kyber has ever been mentioned. The Kyber was going to be the centerpiece of the original Star Wars story draft by Lucas though. In the Star Wars, The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, the Kyber crystal was essentially going to be the singular gateway to the Force itself. In order to actually tap into the Force, one had to interact with the crystal first. Ben Kenobi would have told this to Luke, kicking off a race to the crystal against Darth Vader. Lucas would end up revising this, as he wanted the Force to be something that was free to access by anybody without the necessity of the crystal. He would end up changing the Kyber's importance in the third draft, making it a special crystal once belonging to Obi-Wan. As the story played out, Obi-Wan lost the crystal during the Battle of Kondon, the same battle in the original draft where Luke's father would have died. It was said that the crystal was then taken to the crystal chamber on Alderaan. The idea for the entire crystal was ultimately scrapped by Lucas though, who decided that he wanted the story to revolve more around Luke and Vader's relationship, and he believed that the crystal was beginning to overshadow that. The name would be passed down throughout several ideas over the years though, until it landed as the official name of the crystals used in lightsabers. Kyber crystals were officially born into the lore. However, as we now know, the powerful Kyber crystal and the story associated with it was retooled and released in the novel Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Another fact is that the story was originally going to be the sequel to A New Hope. Alan Dean Foster was brought in during the filming of the first Star Wars and was asked to write a good sequel to it and write it in such a way that it could be filmed on a lower budget. However, after the massive success of Star Wars, Lucas decided to go with a bigger budget story in the form of Empire Strikes Back. He still had Alan Foster release Splinter as a novel though, and the story fits quite comfortably in between Hope and Empire, and works quite naturally in the timeline. This book holds a special place for me because it was actually one of the very first Legends novels I ever read, and I was extremely excited to revisit the story and the power of the Kyber. If you would all be interested in a full breakdown of Splinter of the Mind's Eye though, from start to finish, be sure to comment it down below, and we can break down the original sequel to Star Wars. But as always, guys, for weeks, my every breath weighted by fear, exhaustion. The Empire has hunted me relentlessly, their stormtroopers combing every inch of the galaxy, just to find me. I thought I could keep running, but I can't do it anymore. Not out of cowardice, but because of what they've done, what they've taken from me. I decided to make my stand here, in this desolate place, far from anyone who might suffer for my defiance. The stormtroopers fell quickly, their blasters no match for a focused mind and a blade guided by the Force. For a moment I let myself hope maybe I had a chance, but then I heard it. The unmistakable sound, the low hum of mechanical breathing, steady and unyielding, and I felt it all at the same time. A presence colder than anything that I had ever known. The air grew heavy with dread. A chill crept down my spine. I didn't need to see him to know who had come for me. His resolve, his hate, his power, it suffocated the Force around him. It made it into something twisted and cruel. The darkness seemed to thicken, and when the crimson glow of his lightsaber pierced the shadows, all hope abandoned me. Darth Vader, the Emperor's enforcer, the destroyer of the Jedi, he was here, and I knew that there was no escape. But even as my hands tremble, I tighten my grip on my weapon. I don't ignite it just yet, not until I have to. I know I can't win. There isn't a single path in the Force where I walk away from this alive. But that's not the point anymore. I have a choice, and I choose to face him. If I am going to fall, I won't be running. I will not be cowering. It will be fighting, as a Jedi Knight should. The crimson light of his blade cuts closer, his towering form emerging from the darkness like a shadow-made machine and flesh. I ignite my lightsaber, the hum of its blue light a fragile echo against the roar of his presence. This is my end, I know it, but as the Force has steadied my breath, I know that it is not just an end, it is a chance to prove that even in defeat, a Jedi can stand for hope. The Jedi never stood any chance against Lord Vader, not because they lacked skill or courage, but because Vader was the perfect storm of Jedi discipline, fused with the unrelenting fury of the dark side. His style was a brutal amalgamation of Jedi training, honed during the Clone War, and the raw, destructive power granted to him as a Sith. He wielded his lightsaber with calculated precision, using techniques rooted in Jedi tradition, but twisted them with sheer force in an unyielding thirst for domination. To face Darth Vader was to face not a warrior of immense skill, but a figure who used the teachings of the Jedi as a weapon against them. Every move Vader makes is deliberate, relentless, and meant to crush not just the body, but the spirit of a Jedi as well. But Vader was more than even a Sith. He was a dark mirror of the Jedi and their code, a walking corruption of their ideals. Where the Jedi sought balance and peace, Vader has brought chaos and death, using his mastery of the Force to destroy rather than preserve. His presence is suffocating, his aura radiating despair, and his every action a grim reminder of consequences of falling to the dark side. As a dealer of death, Vader wasn't just a Sith, he was the embodiment of everything that the Jedi feared that they could become. To confront Vader was not just to fight against an opponent, but to stand against the darkest reflection of their own Jedi failings. A physical manifestation of what happens when power is unbound by restraint, and justice is consumed by vengeance. His hybridized lightsaber form was a reflection of his transformation from Anakin to the Lord of the Sith. No longer could he use the fluidity and speed that characterized Anakin's style. Vader forged a new form, though, that incorporated aspects of his former techniques while adapting to his new physical limitations, amplifying his power. His form combines the heavy-handed aggression of 5 Djem So, the precision of 2 Makashi, and the defense and resilience of Form 3 Sarisu. His style is relentless, deliberate. This hybrid form became a signature of Darth Vader, embodying both the Sith philosophy of dominance and the lingering influence of the Jedi. And that is what is fascinating about it. Darth Vader's lightsaber form is still very much Jedi. This is something that Vader hated to his core, but something that he could not deny. As Anakin, his style was a blend of audacity and elegance, a beautiful, tasteful mend of mostly Form 5 with elements of 4. These styles emphasize speed, agility, and overwhelming offense, traits that served him extremely well during the Clone War. But his transformation into Vader forced him to abandon much of the acrobatics and finesse that defined his style. Instead, he adapted Djem So into a focused, powerful, deliberate strikes, exploiting his immense skill and cybernetic durability. He overwhelmed his opposition with sheer force, compensating for his reduced mobility with devastating efficiency and an intimidating hybrid. Although he would loathe to admit it, Vader's style drew heavily from the influences of his 2 greatest teachers, Dooku and Obi-Wan Kenobi. From Dooku, he inherited the precise and elegant movements of Makashi and the dueling style that emphasized control, efficiency, and blade-to-blade combat. Dooku's mastery of the blade left an indelible mark on Anakin, teaching him to focus on the finer points of lightsaber combat. Dooku was one of the first people that Anakin met that was better than he was. As Vader, he incorporated these lessons into his own style, blending Form 2's precision with Djem So's power, making him a deadly duelist capable of exploiting the weaknesses of those less disciplined opponents. Obi-Wan's influence is the most begrudgingly present in Vader's form, though. Obi-Wan's use of Form 3 Sarisu, the defensive and patient style, was a defining factor in his victory over Anakin. Despite Vader's hatred for Kenobi, he incorporated elements of Sarisu into his hybridized form, recognizing the value of its resilience and adaptability. Vader hated to do this after Mustafar, but he did. The defensive capability allowed Vader to withstand prolonged battle, to bait his opponents into overextending, at which point he would strike with overwhelming force, crushing them. The irony of relying on the techniques of a master who defeated him is a bitter but an undeniable truth in Vader's evolution as a combatant and as a character, becoming more ruthless, more like a Sith. His style is a testament to his capacity for adaptation and innovation. He has combined the techniques of his past with his newfound strength and even his limitations, and Vader forged a style uniquely his own. The style embodied the Sith philosophy of using every resource at one's disposal to dominate and control. Vader's combat became a methodical and a terrifying spectacle. Each strike was calculated to break his opponent both physically and mentally. His ability to integrate elements of Makashi and Sarisu into his foundation demonstrated his mastery of lightsaber combat by the time that he became Vader. Vader's combat style represents his internal conflict as much as his prowess. It is a mixture of his past as Anakin and his present as Lord Vader, shaped by teachings of his Jedi mentors and the brutal philosophy of the Sith. Though he sought to bury Anakin and everything that he represented, traces of his former self and his instructors persist even in Vader's style. This duality made Vader a truly unique and a formidable fighter, a terrifying blend of power, precision, and unrelenting will. His form was a reflection of his identity, fractured, retooled, and endlessly devastating. The Jedi thought they knew me, thought they understood the limits of my power. They were wrong. My transformation as Vader demanded that I reforge not just my body, but my approach to combat. I abandoned the acrobatics and speed that has once defined me, adapting my technique into something far more brutal and unyielding. My form is a weapon of dominance, built to capitalize on my immense strength and endurance granted by my armor. Each strike I deliver is calculated to overwhelm and shatter, to force them to relent to my onslaught. I no longer fight as they do, I fight to end them, to remind them of their failure as protectors. But it is not just my strength that defines me, it is precision born of pain and rage. I have accounted for my weaknesses. My limitations are now strengths. Where once my agility was an asset, now my presence, my towering, unrelenting assault on the Jedi. I leave no room for escape. I have blended the discipline of the Jedi training with the furies of the dark side, creating a style that none can withstand. And yet I have come to terms with the lessons of my defeat on Mustafar, accepting the value of Sarisu, the defensive style of Obi-Wan, the one that he used against Anakin. But I do not use it as he does. Using defense is not a concession, but a weapon to wear down my enemy, forcing them to exhaust or overextend themselves before delivering a critical final blow. Darth Vader is not merely a fighter, he annihilates. He is a force perfected through failure, forged in fire, and in time, the galaxy itself will kneel. A single blade is all I require. It is all any true master of the Force or of the lightsaber should need. Those who wield saber staffs with their double blades and flourishes seek to compensate for their inadequacies. They hide their lack of skill behind unnecessary complexity, believing that intimidation or spectacle can substitute for true command. It is folly. The saber staff offers no advantage that a singular blade in the hands of a master cannot overcome. The weapon does not make the warrior, the will, the discipline, the mastery of the wielder do. During the Clone Wars I studied under Count Dooku, a master of Makashi, and the last true duelist of the Jedi Order. Dooku and I shared a disdain for the stagnant, pathetic state of Jedi combat. They had grown soft, their techniques dulled by endless conflicts against droids and blasters, rabble, foes far beneath the challenge of a trained Force sensitive. Dooku recognized the potential within me, and though he was not my true master, he refined my skill with the lightsaber. Under Dooku's tutelage and Palpatine's manipulation, I have become a weapon unparalleled, forged to be the downfall of Jedi and Sith alike. I knew what I was becoming. Even then, just as Dooku was a master, so too would I surpass him. And in time I did, casting aside his lessons as I destroyed him. He was a stepping stone, a necessary link in the chain that led to my ascension. Where Dooku's pride bound him to tradition, I embrace power in all forms, but never at the cost of discipline. This is why I disdain the advancements of the ancient Sith, of Exar Kun. Exar, for all of his brilliance, relied on shock and awe rather than pure, concrete, unstoppable, refined skill. His double-bladed lightsaber was a marvel of engineering to be true, but a symbol of his dependence on spectacle. Even his cunning dual-phase functionality, which I have admittedly integrated into my own weapon, reveals the same reliance on trickery. To Exar, such tactics were a means to victory, but I see them for what they truly are, crutches for the weak. True skill lies in command, not in deception. A master of the lightsaber does not require tricks or surprises to defeat an enemy, only discipline, precision, and the will to dominate. I am that master. My lightsaber is singular, like my purpose. My enemies crumble because I am stronger, more disciplined, better. Whether Jedi, Sith, or misguided soul who dares challenge me, they all fall to the same truth. The blade is an extension of the warrior, and the warrior defines victory. Vader, despite his mastery of the Force and the lightsaber, held strong opinions about weaponry and various combat styles, especially as a Sith Lord. Many of them reflected his rigid philosophy about power and skill. One of the more intriguing aspects of his views, though, was the disapproval of Exar Kun's choice of a double-bladed lightsaber. Vader considered this weapon to be cheap, stating that it allowed the user to rely on its inherent versatility rather than their own skill. For Vader, true mastery meant achieving dominance with the traditional single blade, a weapon that demanded precision, discipline, power. Yet despite his disdain for Exar Kun's double-bladed lightsaber, Vader found admiration in another one of his innovations, the dual-phase function which we just mentioned. This rare modification allowed a lightsaber to alter its blade length mid-combat, providing an element of surprise, one that embraced cunning and deception, qualities that Vader himself wielded to deadly effect. Unlike the double-bladed weapon, which Vader dismissed as a crutch, the dual-phase feature aligned with his belief of using one's intelligence and adaptability to win the day. To Vader, deceit was not a weakness, but a tool for the strong, and he implemented this feature into his own weapon, crafting a lightsaber as versatile and deadly as its wielder.
Interestingly though, Vader's disdain for the unorthodox combat style extends beyond Exar Kun and his lightsaber. He also disliked the Form 6 variant Jar Kai, the art of dual-wielding lightsabers. Despite having practiced this himself both as a Jedi and a Sith, Vader regarded the use of two lightsabers as unnecessary, believing that it diluted the focus and precision required for true mastery of a single lightsaber. Yet on rare occasions, Vader deliberately employed Jar Kai in combat, not out of necessity, but as a display of superiority. In these instances, it seemed as if Vader was handicapping himself intentionally, giving his opponent an advantage so that he could overcome and demonstrate his dominance. These moments revealed a deep aspect of Vader's personality. He needs to prove himself as the ultimate warrior, a man who could defeat any challenge not through reliance on trick, skill, or tools, but through sheer skill. By adopting tactics or techniques he despised, he could underline his own mastery by succeeding where others would fail. Vader's complex relationship with combat styles and weapons all speak to the duality of his character, a Sith Lord who valued cunning, but despised perceived shortcuts, a warrior who embraced deception, yet demanded purity of skill. It is the contradiction that makes Vader's use of a dual face function and the occasional forays into Jar Kai so compelling, as they show a man simultaneously committed to and at odds with his own ideals. Lord Vader's mindset and approach to lightsaber combat were deeply rooted in discipline and dominance. For Vader, lightsaber combat was not merely a martial skill, but was an expression of power, will, and mastery over one's enemies. His philosophy was shaped by his training as a Jedi, his battles during the Clone War, and his transformation into a Sith. Each stage of his evolution honed his belief that pure, singular mastery of a single blade was far more impressive than reliance on the unorthodox or the gimmicky techniques such as double-bladed lightsabers. His mindset and philosophy would also alter over time. He believed in the principle that the lightsaber was an extension of the warrior. To him, the effectiveness of a duel was not determined by the complexity of the weapon, but by his skill. Vader had a foundational training in the classic Jedi forms and refined them under the tutelage of Dooku. He's interesting because he varies from most Sith in the way that he fights. He learned from Dooku's emphasis on elegant, precise movements of Makashi, the duelist form. This allied with Vader's disdain for the chaotic, flashy techniques that he associated with weaker combatants. Vader viewed lightsaber combat as a psychological battle as much as a physical one. His towering presence, his deliberate movements, and devastating strikes were designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Vader sought not just to defeat his enemy, but to break them, leaving them in awe of his power in their final moments. For Vader, combat was a demonstration of superiority, and every encounter was an opportunity to reaffirm that fact. Vader's combat style was characterized by overwhelming offense, relentless pressure, and impenetrable defense. He combined elements of Form 5, Form 2, and Form 3 in order to crush his opponent both mentally and physically. His relentless pressure, Vader used immense physical strength and to deliver powerful sweeping strikes designed to exhaust and overpower his enemy. His blows were calculated to break their defense and force mistakes. He also had great economy of movement. Unlike the acrobatics of the youth of Anakin, Vader's movements were deliberate and efficient. He conserved energy marvelously. This allowed his cybernetically enhanced body to fight without growing tired whatsoever. As long as Vader relied on his cybernetics, he could theoretically fight indefinitely. But he also had psychological domination. His sheer presence and unyielding approach created an aura of inevitability. He used fear as a weapon. He unsettled his opponents before he fought them. He also had force integration. Vader seamlessly incorporated the force into his style, using telekinesis, force chokes, and other abilities to throw his opponents off guard. Disdain for the double-bladed lightsabers continued though for Vader. Vader's view of double-bladed lightsabers as obsolete and a sign as an unskilled warrior. His criticism stemmed from several beliefs. He believed that they were unnecessarily complex. The double-bladed lightsaber introduced complications. They detracted from the purity of single-bladed combat. Its user relied on versatility and reach, but those advantages were nullified by a skilled duelist who could exploit those limitations. It also had a lack of precision. Double-bladed lightsabers required wide sweeping movements, which Vader considered inefficient and prone to creating weaknesses in one's guard. Vader believed that defensively, one blade was superior. He also believed that inherently it compensated for weaknesses. To Vader, wielding a double-bladed lightsaber meant the weapon was to distract or overwhelm with spectacle over skill. He viewed this reliance as the weapon's design as evidence of a lack of a personal mastery. Vader's approach to training was also an unforgiving one, both for himself and others. He constantly sought to perfect his skills, believing that complacency was a path to weakness, a lesson that he learned through his failings as Anakin. He relentlessly drilled the fundamentals of lightsaber combat, ensuring that his mind remained sharp. Focus, precision, power, efficiency. His training emphasized adaptability as well, ensuring that he could counter any opponent, blaster wielders, soldiers, force sensitives, anything. To Vader, double-bladed lightsabers were unworthy for the techniques that he had mastered. It was a shortcut, an elaborate weapon that ultimately went nowhere in his mind. To Vader, lightsaber combat was a reflection of a warrior. A single blade symbolized control and power. Double-bladed weapons represented weakness, a reliance on an unnecessary tool. These are all thoughts that were formed by Dooku. To Vader and Dooku, they believed that superiority in dueling came from the wielder of the lightsaber, never the lightsaber. But as always, my friend,
a name that echoes through the halls of the Sith. As both innovator and destroyer, his mastery of the Force was unparalleled, but it was his mastery of the lightsaber that made him truly unique. A combination of deadly precision, unorthodox tactics, and pure, unrelenting aggression. Kun's foundation lay in Form 6 Nyman, often called the Diplomat's form. This style is heavily criticized by many for its lack of specialization, but Exar Kun saw this as a canvas for his creativity. Where others saw moderation, he saw opportunity. Nyman's integration of Forms 1 through 5 gave him an unprecedented level of versatility, blending speed, agility, and power all into a fluid and adaptive style. But Exar Kun was no ordinary practitioner. He didn't just use Nyman, he transformed it entirely. Exar combined the dual-wielding potential of Nyman with the chaotic ferocity of Form 7 Juyo. Juyo as a form is wild, unpredictable aggression, and Kun wielded it with terrifying precision that was not common for the form. He replaced Nyman's calm balance with the relentless onslaught, striking fear into his enemies and overwhelming even the most skilled opponents. To Exar, this was to face a storm, calculated yet frenzied, adaptable yet brutally unrelenting. Exar's weapon itself was a testament to his ingenuity. Unlike Darth Maul's double-bladed lightsaber, which housed two distinct sets of components, Exar Kun's weapon was an elegant, compact design. By adding a second emitter to the pommel, he created a double-bladed lightsaber only marginally longer than a standard hilt. But this simplicity masked its true complexity. Exar Kun's lightsaber operated on a single set of blue crystals, making it lighter, faster, and more responsive. Maul's weapon may have been iconic, but it was merely an imitation, a tribute to Exar Kun's original innovation. Exar Kun's mastery of Jar Kai, the art of dual wielding, made him even more unpredictable than his weapon did, if that's even possible. He could wield it as if it were two separate weapons, transitioning seamlessly between 1 to 2 blades in the midst of battle. Sometimes he would engage with only one blade activated, lulling his opponent into a false sense of security. At the precise moment of opportunity, he would ignite the secondary blade, turning the tide of the fight in an instant. Adding to his arsenal, Exar Kun also capitalized on the fact that he could alter his blade length mid-combat, a tactic designed to keep enemies guessing and unbalanced, to catch them off guard. In combat, Exar Kun was a master of deception and then dominance. He first revealed his true potential of his weapon during his infamous duel with Master Vodo Sios Boss within the Galactic Senate. At first, Exar Kun fought with restraint of a single blade, testing his opponent. But when the moment was right, he unleashed the secondary blade, overwhelming Boss and showcasing his weapon's devastating power. Exar Kun's approach to lightsaber combat exemplifies the dark side's capacity for corruption and creativity. He took the foundation of Nyman, a form dismissed by many as uninspired, and he elevated it to a deadly art. Through dedication to the subtleties of the art, he achieved a level of mastery that few have ever attained. His speed, agility, and power are unparalleled, blending offense and defense in a way that made him nearly unstoppable. It is important to remember that Nyman's reputation as a weak lightsaber form is the result of its misuse by practitioners who have failed to dedicate themselves to its intricacies. Most Jedi who wield Nyman lack the discipline to fully realize its potential, but Exar Kun was different. By combining Nyman with the sheer aggression of Juyo and the precision of Jar Kai, he became the embodiment of versatility and lethality, a living weapon honed to perfection. Exar Kun didn't just fight with the lightsaber, he redefined what it meant to use one. His combination of forms and specializations made him one of the deadliest duelists in galactic history. He was more than a Sith Lord, he was an artist of destruction. Exar Kun, a name that inspires fear and respect. A reminder of what the dark side can create when wielded by a true master, a diplomat of death, a warrior with no equal. Exar Kun was not just a master of the double-bladed lightsaber, he was its creator, its innovator, and its greatest wielder. He achieved what many thought to be impossible, the fusion of two blades into a compact, elegant hilt that required not only exceptional skill, but also an unorthodox approach to combat. His innovation transcended the weapon itself, reshaping the way lightsaber combat was understood and practiced. The weapon, compact, complex, revolutionary. Before Exar, the double-bladed lightsaber was an idea without a champion, a theoretical design dismissed as impractical or overly cumbersome. But Exar's ingenuity brought it to life. Unlike later iterations such as Darth Maul's elongated pommel-to-pommel saber staff, Exar Kun's design was compact and efficient. By adding a second emitter to the pommel of a traditional hilt and running both blades through a single set of blue crystals, he created a weapon that was only marginally longer than a standard lightsaber hilt. This compact design allowed for greater maneuverability and precision while still delivering the lethality of two blades. It was a weapon that demanded perfection. The compact hilt offered less margin for error than the longer designs of later users. Missteps would mean striking oneself with the blade, leaving critical openings in defense. Exar Kun not only mastered these challenges, but he turned them into strengths. He wielded it with fluidity and control that no one has ever matched, proving that it wasn't the weapon's complexity that limited its potential, it was the wielder's dedication. The form, a new style for a new weapon. The double-bladed lightsaber was more than a weapon. It was a call to reinvent combat itself. Existing lightsaber forms were designed for single-bladed weapons, making them ill-suited to the demands of a dual blade. Exar responded to this challenge by developing a unique hybrid fighting style that combined the adaptability of Form 6, the ferocity of Form 7, and the dual wielding of Jar Kai, a variation of 6, Nyman as a foundation. Exar Kun's foundation in Nyman allowed him to integrate elements from all prior lightsaber forms. Its versatility gave him the flexibility to adapt to any opponent, blending offense and defense seamlessly. But Exar took Nyman further than anyone before or maybe since, replacing its trademark moderation with an unhinged aggression. Juyo's chaos and precision. Juyo's unpredictable, ferocious strikes became a core element of Exar's style. While Nyman allowed him to adapt, Juyo allowed him to dominate. The combination was devastating. When Nyman brought balance, Juyo brought raw power, creating a style that has been described as calculated and chaotic. Jar Kai's dual-wielding influence. Exar Kun's mastery of Jar Kai enhanced his control over the double-bladed weapon. He treated the weapon as if it were two separate blades, using one for offense and the other for defense or feints. His ability to deactivate or reactivate one or both blades mid-combat added a layer of unpredictability, making him almost impossible to anticipate. A weapon for the ages, a master for eternity. Exar's innovation was not just in creating the double-bladed lightsaber, it was in proving that such a weapon could be wielded with unparalleled skill. His design and combat style set the standard that remains unmatched, even in a galaxy where the weapon has a very long history now. Darth Maul, one of the most famous users of the double-bladed lightsaber, was a mere imitator compared to Exar. While Maul's saber staff was functional and extremely deadly, it lacked the elegance and complexity of Exar's original design. Maul's combat style, while impressive, relied on brute force and acrobatics, where Exar's style was a blend of grace, precision, adaptability. To this day, Exar Kun remains the greatest wielder of the double-bladed lightsaber. He was more than a Sith, he was a revolutionary, reshaping the galaxy's understanding of both the weapon and Six as a form. His mastery of the double-bladed lightsaber is a testament to his genius. He didn't just invent a weapon, he pioneered a style that pushed the boundaries of lightsaber combat. A weapon demanded perfection from him, and he rose to the challenge, becoming an undisputed master. The fact that Exar Kun is the inventor of the double-bladed lightsaber and still its greatest wielder speaks to his unparalleled skill and vision. In a galaxy filled with legends, Exar Kun stands apart, not only a Sith Lord but a true innovator, whose brilliance and mastery shaped the destiny of the entire galaxy. Exar Kun transcended the constraints of any single form. He blurred the lines of traditional combat, making him a duelist who could adapt to and overwhelm any opponent. Some may even suggest that Exar Kun had moved beyond lightsaber forms altogether, his style a synthesis of discipline, chaos, and raw genius, crafted not by adhering to the rules of the Jedi or the Sith, but by making his own. Exar Kun loved his weapon for the simple fact that it was not forgiving. Its complexity required flawless control, razor-sharp reflexes, and split-second decision-making, and Exar Kun thrived in this state of constant pressure. For him, perfection was not an ideal, but a necessity. He could not afford mistakes. To be Sith is to court death, and Exar Kun embraced that truth fully. But Exar Kun was not merely courting death, he was defying it. His combat style pushed the boundaries of possibility. He wielded his double-bladed lightsaber with such mastery that it became an extension of his will, a tool of chaos and order with no equal measure. He innovated where others conformed, discarding the traditions of the Jedi and the predictable structures of lightsaber combat. He reinvented what it means to fight, to dominate, to survive. Exar Kun's mastery was so complete that he was never bested in single combat. His only recorded match was a stalemate against Ulic Qel-Droma, one of the greatest duelists of his era and a formidable Sith himself. Even here, Exar Kun proved his absolute equal. But to Exar, this was not about victory or defeat. It was about breaking limitations, reshaping the nature of combat. Many say that Nyman is a form designed to compromise, a blend of forms 1 through 5 with no singular strength in its entirety. It is described as the diplomat's form, emphasizing balance and adaptability, but this very balance is viewed as mediocrity. It lacks the raw power of Djem So, the relentless aggression of Juyo, or the elegant precision of Makashi. In truth, it is said that Nyman has no real strengths, a weakness inherent to its very philosophy. Yet, in this supposed weakness lies a hidden potential, one so rarely realized that it is almost faded to myth. To most, Nyman is simply good enough, a jack of all trades that is easy to learn but nearly impossible to master. But who would ever try? That was not the point after all. To those precious few who dedicate themselves to its subtleties, who elevate its adaptability into a weapon of supreme versatility, Nyman becomes something greater, and no one embodies this more than Exar. Exar, without question, the greatest Nyman practitioner in the history of the galaxy. His mastery profound, complete. He transcended the limitations of the form, and through his innovation and relentless pursuit of perfection, he proved that Nyman, when taken to its peak, could rival and surpass the greatest of lightsaber combat styles. His seamless blend of Nyman's adaptability with the sheer ferocity of Juyo and the dual-wielding precision of Jar Kai has created a combat style that has both been unpredictable and unstoppable all at once. Only one other Sith in the galaxy's long history could even compare to Exar in the category of Nyman's mastery: Darth Krayt, the founder of the One Sith Order. Krayt too demonstrated the heights that could be reached by dedicating oneself to Form 6. Yet, even Krayt, with all of his power, could not match the innovation and mastery of Exar Kun. Exar's compact, double-bladed lightsaber, his ability to manipulate blade lengths, and his unmatched versatility set him apart as a true revolutionary of lightsaber combat. But mastery of Nyman is not just about technique, it is about overcoming the form's inherent flaws. Most of those who rely on Nyman fall victim to its lack of specialization, finding themselves outmatched by more focused forms and duels. This weakness is why so many Jedi who wielded Nyman fell during the Battle of Geonosis. It is a form for diplomats, for generalists, not for duelists. Yet, Exar Kun defied that expectation. He transformed Nyman from a balanced compromise to a lethal art, proving that its true strength lies in the wielder, not the form. In my belief, Nyman is indeed weaker than the specialized forms of others. It cannot match Makashi's elegance, Djem So's power, or Ataru's speed. But Exar Kun proved that mastery, true mastery of Nyman, elevates it to heights that rival or surpass those of any other form. Exar's adaptability, innovation, makes him a contender for the greatest duelist in all of Star Wars lore, period. Whether or not Exar is truly the greatest duelist is not for me to decide. That determination belongs to you, dear viewer. My role is merely to present the case, to show how a form widely considered the weakest became in the hands of Exar Kun, a weapon of unparalleled lethality and elegance. At its pinnacle, Nyman may be the greatest lightsaber form of all, but the path to mastery is so steep, and the mountaintop so narrow, that few ever stand atop it. Its strength lies in unparalleled versatility, requiring perfection in every aspect of combat: offense, defense, power, precision. For the rare few who achieve this mastery, Nyman transcends balance, becoming the ultimate lightsaber form. But thank you so much. It's pretty easy to tell Jedi and Sith artifacts apart from one another. One will empower the light side, provide calming or regenerative effects, while the other will corrupt the being to evil and empower the emotions of the darkness. The Jedi don't often associate themselves with building artifacts the way the Sith do. However, they are known for collecting crystals or gems that are strong and potent in the Force. These are usually legendary crystals that empower a Jedi's lightsaber to help them in battle against the darkness. Most Jedi crystals are very identifiably a part of the light side, while those that belong to the Sith are obviously those that bring destruction. Typically, lightsaber crystals are abhorred even by the near opposite factions of other crystals. For the Jedi, they ran the risk of getting corrupted to the dark side, as prolonged exposure to a Sith crystal was known to do that. And for the Sith, the powers of the lighter crystals often weakened their own, but there existed a single lightsaber crystal in the lore that both the Jedi and Sith orders firmly believed belonged to them. That lightsaber crystal is known as the Heart of the Guardian. Welcome back to the Archives, Acolytes. It's time yet again to talk about one of our personal favorite topics on the channel, lightsaber crystal lore. But before we begin our excavation of the Kyber caves, the crystals themselves have whispered to us that many who are present are strangers and have not yet subscribed. My friends, the crystals know all and can speak great knowledge to you, so ignite the subscribe button and open your mind to the daily uploads. Now, without further delay, let us listen to the secrets in the Heart of the Guardian. The Heart of the Guardian, one of the most widely disputed lightsaber crystals in all of the EU. Let's begin where we obviously should, its color. The crystal was a golden yellow color, and when placed in the hilt of a lightsaber, it produced a blade with a unique bronze glow and a yellow core. It was also one of the few rare crystals in existence that could actually alter the effects of other lightsaber crystals. Both the Heart of the Guardian and its sister crystal, the Mantle of the Force, both formed a collection known as the Companion Crystals. A lot of the time a lightsaber will have more than one in the hilt. A primary crystal and a focusing crystal. When placed in the hilt of a lightsaber, it will augment and improve the effects of whatever the other Kyber crystal it is paired with. This usually comes in the form of vastly improving the lightsaber's overall energy output. Its yellow blade is also notably faster than other lightsabers, causing it to be quite useful in combat. Described as lighter, swifter, more potent. Strangely, it does not appear to have any particular alignment with either side of the Force, but the Guardian remains in balance. Its balance is only tipped when it is paired with a crystal of a particular different alignment. This adds on to its already perplexing mystery. And that's when we now have to talk about where the Heart of the Guardian comes from. This is the strangest part of the lore, as its origins and history are completely obscured by heresy on both sides. According to the Jedi, the crystal was involved in the very creation of the Guardian of the Jedi Order, and what we mean is the path of the Jedi Guardian, the Guardian discipline that a Jedi can take besides that of a Consular and a Sentinel. Strangely, there is little to no information on when exactly the three paths were created and founded, as their ancestry stretches all the way back to the ancient days of the Jedi Order. Back then, the Jedi Rangers and the Jedi Seers were those that were the closest paths to the Guardian or a Consular. Foundations of the Order, the three disciplines weren't really established by name until after 25,000 BBY, after the Jedi had founded their second homeworld on Ossus. This is where the crystal got its namesake though, the Heart of the Guardian. According to Jedi prophecies, the heart would appear at a time of great turmoil, and was told by Jedi seers that it would bring about salvation across the stars. But the Sith also lay claim to the crystal, yet their history is even more muddled. According to Sith legend, it was an object of their heritage. They claimed that once it was found, that the crystal would bring about domination to the Sith in all known space. There is no other information in the Sith lore or history regarding the crystal though, only that it singles a time of great conquest, war, and strife. We were inclined just to give its origins to the Jedi, until we learned more about the crystal. The heart of the Guardian was lost for centuries until it was uncovered on Yavin 4 by a Rodian inventor by the name of Suvan Tan, located around the time of Revan. He was discovered that both it and its sister crystal, the Mantle of the Force, carried with them extreme power, and he took them. At the outbreak of the Jedi Civil War, Suvan Tan abandoned the Republic space station over Yavin to avoid all combat altogether. Much later though, he was harassed by a Trandoshan and a group of thugs who wore stealth field generators, but was rescued by a redeemed Revan. As a thank you, Tan gave Revan a look into his private stock, where both the rare companion crystals were being held, believing that Revan would appreciate their beauty. Stepping outside of the lore for a moment here, the Heart of the Guardian and the Mantle of the Force made their first and only appearances in Knights of the Old Republic and in the game. It is completely up to the player whether or not they choose one or both of the crystals. Officially in the lore though, we have to state that Revan may or may not have used the heart, simply because it is a player choice. Also, we believe that the reason the heart is not aligned with either the light or the dark is because it's meant to underscore that you can take Revan in any direction you choose as a player. As an augmentation to your lightsaber, it will support whatever force alignment your crystal already has. This is one of the primary reasons why the companion crystals are so rare and expensive in-game. The crystals have no prerequisites on who can use them or how they're aligned, but since we want to dive into the true meaning behind it, we're going to continue theorizing what the Heart of the Guardian actually means. Since Tan located the Heart of the Guardian on Yavin 4, this makes it incredibly complicated to nail down whether or not it truly belongs to the Jedi or Sith in origin. Its name and detailed history suggest Jedi, however Yavin is traditionally a Sith-owned world. It was the planet settled when Naga Sadow escaped during the Great Hyperspace War. Naga arrived with a ship full of Massassi slaves and an entire trove of artifacts. While there, he conducted many experiments and built great monuments and temples to himself. Around 1,000 years later, Exar Kun would travel and arrive to Yavin 4 and would become the heir to Naga Sadow's legacy. It would be Exar who would conquer the descendants of the Massassi and enslave them once again, building even more temples and monuments to himself while conducting more dark side experiments and deep study. He plundered the knowledge of Freed and Nad and Naga Sadow, becoming an expert in Sith sorcery and alchemy. It was here when he fashioned the horrific Sith warbeasts like the Terentatex, creating a myriad of terrible artifacts. There is definitely a possibility that the Heart of the Guardian could have been one of these artifacts created by either Exar or Naga Sadow, but we actually believe this is unlikely. Exar took great care to ensure that all things he were created were as evil and as corrupted as possible. Nothing he made was not totally tainted and absorbed with the dark side. It is possible that he created a lightsaber crystal which was destined to bring forth the dominion of a new Sith Empire. But there is one detail that should not be overlooked. Right before its destruction, Exar Kun pilfered the Jedi Temple on Ossus for all Jedi artifacts he could find. He specifically, though, went after a collection of ancient Jedi lightsabers. But it was Master Ud Banar who sacrificed himself to protect this collection from Exar. He transformed himself into an invincible tree to cover the ancient lightsabers so that Exar would never find them. But in the temple, it is very possible that the Sith Lord took the Heart of the Guardian since he was searching for lightsaber-related paraphernalia. It makes sense that he would want the crystal since it was a powerful dueling tool. However, by the fact that it wasn't corrupted irrevocably to the dark side while in Exar's possession, perhaps he didn't have time to, or perhaps he even couldn't. Perhaps the two crystals were too powerful for even Exar, which would truly be a testament to their potency. But either way, as time wore on, the Heart of the Guardian was largely forgotten. Both the Jedi and the Sith forgot about it, until it was reclaimed by Revan, quite appropriately. It is assumed that these crystals remained in Revan's collection until his death. In that way, the Heart of the Guardian truly arrived at a time when it was needed the most. But it wouldn't be too long afterward that Darth Nihilus and the Sith Triumvirate would arrive on the scene, so the crystal also showed itself when the Sith began dominating the galaxy at large. In a weird way, it sort of fulfilled both prophecies. But come to seek the forgotten truths, secrets the Jedi and time itself has tried to bury. You wield your lightsabers, those sterile, lifeless tools, believing them to be the pinnacle of power, but you know nothing of true weaponry, nothing of the blades that once ruled the galaxy. The Sith warblades crafted through sorcery and forged in fire and the blood of one's enemies were not mere weapons, but extension of one's resolve. They held the strength of the dark side itself, binding hatred, fury, and conquest into a masterpiece of both artistry and destruction. They made a weapon that embodied the duality of elegance and brutality. Its blade, forged from a dark, nearly indestructible alloy, is etched with ancient Sith runes that pulse faintly with the crimson glow, alive with the dark side of the Force itself. Along with the fuller of the blade, precious jewels are embedded, blood-red rubies, dark onyx, and glinting obsidian, each one imbued with a fragment of the Force, enhancing the weapon's power and presence. These jewels shimmer ominously in light, their beauty a stark contrast to the blade's purpose, to deal death. The hilt is crafted with a rare and exotic metal, and accented with intricate gold, the spirals so beautiful, the angular patterns so strike. Despite its ornate appearance, the grip is wrapped in blackened leather, ensuring the wielder maintains full control during combat. The crossguard flares out with jagged edges, sharp enough to injure an opponent even in a defensive stance, and it again glows faintly with a fiery hue. A reminder that this blade is much more than a weapon of conquest. It is a symbol of mastery. Though adorned with fine materials, there is no mistaking the Warblade's lethal intent. Its weight is balanced perfectly for powerful sweeping movements, and its edge is honed to razor-sharp precision, capable of cleaving through armor, bone, and resolve. In battle, the blade becomes an extension of fury, a conduit for the dark side that overwhelms enemies with each devastating blow. The jewels, beautiful, serve as reservoirs of energy, amplifying the wielder's connection to the Force, fueling the blade's devastating strikes. The weapon is no mere decoration. It is the ultimate embodiment of the Sith's philosophy. It is beauty intertwined with destruction, power wrapped in decadence, and death delivered with elegance. To wield the Sith Warblade is not to wield a weapon, but the will of the dark side. Each blade is a masterpiece, a relic of devastating power. Unlike your glowing toys, these were forged to endure, to dominate, to crush hope itself. They shattered shields, deflected energy, and tore through the resolve of any who dared to stand against the Sith. Even now, the power of the swords calls to those with the courage to seek them, waiting in the shadows of tombs for a worthy hand to claim it. Are you prepared to uncover what was once lost? Then listen closely and remember, power will always come at a cost. The lightsaber is a tool of elegant simplicity, praised by the modern Sith and Jedi alike. But to those who were once ruling in the age of true power, these glowing trinkets are nothing more than a shadow of true weaponry, a shadow of true craftsmanship. A lightsaber's hum is sterile, its glow lifeless. It is a weapon of pragmatism, designed for efficiency and precision, yet devoid of the raw, visceral thrill of combat. In my era, we wielded war blades, massive brutal instruments of war that carried not only the weight of their steel, but the dark energies of the Force itself. Every swing of a warblade was a symphony of power, a testament to the wielder's mastery over the blade and the dark side. The presence of a warblade on the battlefield would break an enemy's resolve before ever the first strike landed. The weapons were imbued with the essence of the Creator, forged through rituals that bound the dark side to the very metals. When you swung a blade, you didn't just strike flesh, you struck at the spirit. Each blow carried with it hatred, fear, and passion of generations of Sith magnified by the Force. Their callings can be heard. A lightsaber cuts cleanly, leaving no trace of its wielder's intent beyond an act of severance. But a warblade crushed, it tore, it maimed. A warblade left behind scars both physical and spiritual that would never heal. And then you have the thrill of combat, an experience lost to wielders of the lightsaber. A lightsaber's weightless blade requires no strength, no endurance, no connection to the weapon. It is impersonal, mechanical. But a warblade demanded everything: strength, skill, focus. The clash of steel on steel, the sparks flying as blades met with a roar, the vibration of the impact resonating up your arm. These were the moments where the dark side truly thrived. Combat was not a contest of skill, it was an act of domination, a raw display of superiority over the weak. The warblade made every strike a statement of the Sith's power. Lightsabers may suit a modern age of efficiency and utility, but they lack the soul of a true weapon. They are tools for duelists and generals, not the tool of a conqueror. A warblade was more than a weapon. It is an extension of a wielder's will and purpose, a conduit of the dark side, a symbol of dominance. To wield such a weapon was to embrace the essence of being a Sith, unrelenting, unstoppable, undeniably supreme. The galaxy remembers the scars that we left, even if its warriors now wield lightsabers and call them superior. But we spirits know the truth. There is no weapon as mighty, no combat as thrilling, and no power as raw as that of a true Sith warblade. The warblade was not forged, it was created, and rituals demanded mastery over the darkest corners of the Force. These weapons are not tools, they are extensions, crafted with painstaking care and immense skill. The creation process began with the infusion of rare and powerful materials, gathered from cursed worlds and ancient battlegrounds, ancient places where the dark side still lingered strongest. Sith alchemists would chant forbidden incantations over the molten ore, imbuing it with the essence of hatred, rage, and fear. As the blade cooled, it absorbed the spirit of its maker, binding themselves eternally to the dark side. What resulted was not a weapon, an artifact though, of destruction, humming with energy and malice. In many ways, the Sith Warblade was superior to a lightsaber. It could cleave through conventional armor, shields, with ease. Their edges enhanced by the dark side cut deeper, strike harder than any mundane weapon ever would. While lightsabers rely on energy to disarm and kill, Warblades combined force with mystical weight of dark sorcery. The Warblade's sheer mass and density allowed them to deflect lightsaber strikes and even overpower lightsabers in the hands of the most skilled warriors. Combat with such a blade was a test of strength and endurance, rewarding those that could channel their emotions into attacks. Against a lightsaber, the Warblade may even hold a distinct advantage. It could disrupt the precise rhythm of lightsaber combat, forcing an opponent into brutal, chaotic exchanges where the dark side thrived, and the Warblade was nearly always supreme. It is superior not because of its physical construction alone, but in the spiritual toll that it exacted. The blade carried with it a legacy of conquest and power. They had an aura that would sap away the will of the most steadfast adversaries. A duel with a Warblade was not a battle of skill. It was an encounter with the raw force of the dark side. A lightsaber is designed to sever but not crush. The Warblade represented a visceral and complete domination. In the hands of a true Sith warrior, it was not merely a weapon, but an instrument of death. And yet, the era of the Warblade has long since passed on, its secrets lost to time and the relentless intervention of the cursed Jedi. The ancient Sith who forged these masterpieces were driven to extinction, their knowledge scattered or destroyed by millennia of conflict. What remains of the Warblade's legacy lies buried in forgotten tombs, its power diminished in the eyes of a galaxy that worships efficiency over artistry. The lightsaber, efficient, symbolic in its own right, has come to define the modern Force wielder, while the Warblade reigns supreme only now in memory. But for those who remember, the Warblade remains the epitome of a Sith's power, a weapon of conquest, passion, and supremacy. Its forgotten dominance is a tragedy of history, a testament to the destructive power of time and the victories of those who sought to extinguish the Sith's flame. Before you leave the shadows of our archives though, consider this. The ancient Sith were more than conquerors. They were architects of power, visionaries of strength, pillars that the galaxy has long since forgotten. You have glimpsed only a fragment of our history, but the archives hold countless secrets waiting to be uncovered. Explore the rituals, the weapons, and the philosophies that made the Sith the true masters of the Force. Thank you for daring to step into the dark and learn from the spirits of the past. Our legacy endures through those who seek it, and now you carry a piece of that knowledge with you. Return when you are ready, for the archives will always be here. May the Force be with you.